Good morning. The Elementary and Secondary Education Committee will now come to order. Please call the roll.
Chairman Basie.
Present.
Vice Chairman Hafner. Here. Representatives Brown. Here. Baker. Here. Bangert. Here. Black. Cristofanelli. Here. DeGroat. Dogan. Fischel. Here. Grier. Here. Hicks. Mackey. Here. Nurnberg. Here. Patterson. Here. Pollitt. Here. Sharp. Stacy. Terry. Tulson Reich. Okay, we've got one more coming here, and then I'll give you. Yes.
Okay, we do have a quorum. And just to let everybody know, we have had some changes. We are not going to be executing on a majority of the bills that are listed on the notice, but we'll be voting on Representative Veets' bill 1804 and Representative Shields' bill 1721, and the rest will have to wait. And with that, the committee will now go into executive session. I move that House Bill 1804 be voted to pass. Any discussion? This is Representative Veets' bill we heard last week. Seeing none, please call the roll.
Chairman Basie.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Hafner. Aye. Representatives Brown. Aye. Baker. Aye. Bangert. Aye. Black. Aye. Cristofanelli. Aye. DeGroat. Dogan. Aye. Fischel. Aye. Fischel. Aye. Aye. Grier. Aye. Hicks. Mackey. Aye. Nurnberg. Aye. Patterson. Aye. Pollitt. Aye. Sharp. Stacy. Terry. Aye. Tulson Reich. Aye. I have 17. Make sure here. I've got. Yeah, yeah, that was me.
All right, by your vote of 17 ayes, 0 noes, you have voted House Bill 1804 do pass. I now move that House Bill 1721 be voted to pass. This is Representative Shields' superintendent sharing bill. Any discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Chairman Basie.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Hafner. Aye. Representatives Brown. Aye. Baker. Aye. Bangert. Aye. Black. Aye. Cristofanelli. Aye. DeGroat. Dogan. Aye. Fischel. Aye. Grier. Aye. Hicks. Mackey. Aye. Nurnberg. Aye. Patterson. Aye. Pollitt. Sharp. Stacy. Terry. Aye. Tulson Reich.
Okay, by your vote of 17 ayes, 0 noes, you voted House Bill 1721 do pass. We'll now leave executive session and we'll pick up from where we left off last week with Representative Dogan's House Bill 2428. Yeah, I believe we finished testimony. Is there anyone here that would like to testify in favor of House Bill 2428? Anyone here in opposition to House Bill 2428? And I want to remind all witnesses, if you have not done so online, please fill out a witness form, sign it, and leave it in the box on the desk up there. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Amber Binge, and I am the Assistant Director and Lobbyist for the nonprofit Missouri Equity Education Partnership, which is a nonpartisan organization who is uniting pro-education Missourians across the state. I am a former middle school science teacher. I'm also a certified human rights consultant, and I am working on my doctoral degree in organizational development. I told you my credentials and title because those were achieved with a lot of hard work and a public school education. I keep listening to all of you speak about these anecdotal processes that are happening in public education. And I'm going to tell you about my real life experience as a public school educator. I taught middle school science in the Hazelwood School District, and in any given year, I would teach between 120 and 150 students. My students came from various backgrounds, and I would keep that in mind as I was developing lesson plans, which included IEPs, which are individualized education plans, for each of the students to make sure that I remained within the law. I had to collect data on all students, work to analyze to see where there were deficiencies, then review my lessons plans to make adjustments and try something new to collect data all over again. What it doesn't account for was when Michael Brown was shot and Ferguson erupted in protest, and my tired, scared students needing a safe place to vent and be emotional came to my classroom. It doesn't account for students coming to you and speaking about how they don't feel valued or seen by adults in their lives. It doesn't account for helping students through heartbreak, death, and the discovery of their voice. And it doesn't account for life in general. However, goals are goals, and as a teacher, I did all that I could to make sure that my students were prepared for the next level and further. And again, I would adjust my lesson plans and start the process all over again. I, nor any public school teacher I know, had time to indoctrinate students with nefarious agendas. I only had time to do my job. What you're trying to do with this bill is make teaching and planning impossible, and thus eroding trust and dismantling the support system that is public education by putting a chilling effect on teachers. Many educational stakeholders across Missouri are tuned in right now and closely listening and watching what you decide to do and say today. Educational stakeholders find it appalling that Missouri is behind Mississippi in public education funding, and that 20% of our rural schools in Missouri are down to 4 days a week due to budget constraints. Educational stakeholders find it appalling that a made-up issue is being debated on this floor and not how to make the livelihood of teachers and thus their communities better. If you really cared about education, you would be debating about the failure rate for charter schools in the state, which is around 40%, and that displaces students and has wasted hundreds of millions of taxpayer money. Money that would have made a miracle effect on public schools and thus Missouri communities. What we do have are politicians wanting to legislate classrooms and police speech. We have bills like the one before us where politicians will be making curriculum decisions and not the people who are licensed and trained to do so. We have politicians who want to use taxpayer money for a voucher system that only elite Missourians want so they don't have to pay for private schools. You still have the opportunity to do actual good in your communities by not passing these bills and bills like this. You have an opportunity when you leave this room to be saviors and not destroyers of public education. A lot of educational stakeholders in Missouri are tuned in and listening and watching. Now decide, are you pro-education, pro-student, pro-teacher, or are you not? Your decision will show Missourians where you stand, and the voters will act accordingly.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I do have a question. You mentioned the rural school districts in 4 days. Do you believe in local control?
Do I believe in local control? Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay, so I think some of these school districts, you might be correct, they did this for financial reasons. But I know a couple in my district that did this for other reasons. So do you think the legislature should mandate 5-day school weeks?
Not that you should mandate it, but you should fund public education so that they
I think
wouldn't have to go to
we
a.
provide record funding every year I've been here.
Absolutely, you do not. Actually, that is a mistruth because you are 49th in funding in the United States of America.
No, I disagree with that. So we
I
have,
can send you the
we
data.
provided record funding every year I've been here, record funding. So thank you for your time. Any other questions for this lady? Representative Baker,
To inquire.
proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Got a couple questions. Thank you for coming today and speaking. You mentioned you adjust your lesson plan. I'm trying to get a little better picture of what you were speaking to there. So, at my understanding of what you're saying, you said you adjust your lesson plans according to current events. Is that how you approach education?
It depends on what the situation may be. If we have, like, I don't know, let's say a tsunami in Thailand, right? And I was a science teacher. I would use that as an example of what the effects of a tsunami were. You have to go where the kids are and where the current society is today.
So, but you used other examples, not the tsunami when you were mentioning that. You used other examples that were happening.
I
Maybe
used Michael Brown. Yes, I can tell you about how I adjusted my lessons for the Michael Brown incident if you would like to. Desi actually came in and witnessed that lesson. We had a lot of angry students. I worked in Hazelwood. We were next door neighbors. A lot of my kids were next door to the community to where it happened. They were mad at police officers. They were mad at teachers. They were mad at anybody. And the science teacher across the hall from me decided to do a lesson using chemical and physical changes, which was what we were teaching. And we set up a crime scene, and we set up different police departments and had people be a police officer, a forensic scientist, a reporter, and they got to see what the actual jobs were of these people they were so angry at. And they got to see how hard those jobs were when making determinations for how to solve a crime. But we use that, our physical and chemical changes lessons, to reinforce that there are good community members in Missouri.
interesting. Another question. So you said that we're addressing a made-up issue.
Yes.
Can you speak to that? Like, what do you say is a made-up issue that we're trying to address with legislation?
Well, what you guys are doing is you're saying that teachers are doing this nefarious job of indoctrinating students to say, I'm going to use some of your examples, white guilt. That never occurs. That's anecdotal evidence. That is one person, one of your constituents feeling some type of way, and then you guys decided to legislate. But what you're deciding to legislate is for the voucher system and to fund it. We know that.
Well, I would disagree with your statement there, but the other statement that you made that I take issue with is saying that we are to be a savior of education as elected officials.
Yeah, to fund it.
I totally disagree with that. I wasn't elected to be a savior of an institution per se. I was elected to make decisions
For your
that would
community.
affect our community and the
Right.
children in our community, and education, a quality education for
A
those
quality,
students.
accurate education, yes.
Yes. So I would say that I advocate even if it was for a voucher system, I would advocate for quality education that many parents would like to have for their students. So to make the statement that any other opinion or any other direction that we take in that is trying to destroy public education, I think, is an inaccurate statement.
It is. I disagree with you because what you're doing, first of all, is not funding public education. I can send you the data. Number two, what you're doing is you're trying to fine teachers for not using certain types of languages, thus a $10,000 fine per occurrence. That money goes 20% to the person who sues, 80% into your voucher program. We see what's happening.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Durnburn, proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to briefly comment and inquire. So first of all, thank you for being here today. I was also a teacher when Michael Brown was killed, and one of the things that you said really stuck with me, and I remember that day in terms of, you know, when I did go back to students. I was teaching at a school in the urban core, and in 5 years there, I had 5 students who were not African American or biracial. And when I walked in, and I'm not quite sure exactly what was happening, other than all I heard was an entire class of about 20, 25 kiddos coming in and into my room and just sharing their total frustration and ire of what it was to be a Black person in this country. At the time, I was a Spanish teacher, and I remember one of the things that I think is most important about teaching is having to meet our students where they are, right? So if I went in and just started jumping into, hey, you guys, today we're working on this was an advanced Spanish class, the past, present of the subjunctive. I mean, something ludicrous, right? Like, tell me, what would you do? So we're, using hypotheticals, but we're talking about this situation because it's real life. And so what I think is important, and this is why I encourage all of my colleagues to go into schools. If we want to see civics in action, go talk with 4th graders who are discovering state government for the first time. If you want to talk about, for so many different reasons, right? Whether it's going in to be a guest speaker, which I know many, many of my colleagues do, or if it's just going to shadow an educator for the day. I don't think there's anything that's more valuable than that. And I say this because I try to get into our schools at least once every other week, as whether it's guest speaking or whether it's going in to listen to some sort of presentation or assembly. But there are a lot of fields that I know nothing about because I've never been in them. And I would often joke as a teacher through December of 2020 that if I could indoctrinate my students, the one thing, like if I had every superpower I wanted to be able to do was indoctrinate them to take out their AirPods or take off their headphones when they walked in and just say, hey, right? And man, if I could even indoctrinate them to bring some sort of writing apparatus, I'm like, wonderful, right? So those were the things that that I say, like, teachers truly are superheroes because we do everything every day. You wear so many different hats, and it's a tough environment, but I appreciate what you were saying, and I want to keep this germane to this committee. We aren't talking about in terms of funding, that really is, a lot of it is through the budget process, not that sometimes we have fiscal notes attached to what we do, but I just really appreciated what you had to say there in terms of making sure that, and again, when you're in the classroom, I think you see this, whether it's talking about, I don't know, they're previewing like the Super Bowl commercials and using that to say, hey, you guys, this is what we were just doing in terms of, right? It's so many different areas, right? If it was a Apple commercial on an iPhone where they did greetings in 15 different languages, like, hey, what did they say in that part that was in Spanish, right? Like, it is about bringing the real world in and making connections with students because we know you don't learn typically, if you can't find something to relate to. I mean, that's just, yes, can you do, mundane rote memorization? Yes, but I'm saying real learning and connection. So again, thank you for being here. I guess, and I talked long enough, so I'll save any inquiries for the end, but I guess just, appreciate your experience and thank you for doing what you do today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions for the witness? Okay, thank you, ma'am, for your time. Is there anyone here to testify for informational purposes for House Bill 2428? Anyone here? We'll get there. Anyone in support of House Bill 2428? Next person in opposition. Is your mic on? Is a green light on there, sir?
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Gotcha. Sorry about that. Good morning, Chair. My name is Glenn Bonner. I'm with the NAACP, First Vice President. I'm here to oppose House Bill 2428. Children deserve to learn in an environment that adapts to their needs. If teachers are constantly afraid of violating Vega standard, they cannot focus on the job of educating our children. There may be legitimate reason to treat students who recently immigrate or who has social needs because of their race advantageously. This would include things like more one-on-one time with the teacher or additional emotional support and attention during classroom discussion. This version still prohibits classroom discussion about our changing society. Could not discuss things like 9-11 or pending U.S. Supreme Court cases without prior consent from our students. Would non-consent student be asked to step out into the hall? The fear of lawsuit brought by angry parents would have a chilling effect on teachers. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is tasked with monitoring and regulating our public schools. Any violations should be brought to them to be remedied. The current generation may not be responsible for the sins of our forefathers, but we are certainly responsible for learning from them and for trying to do better. You have the floor.
Okay, thanks, sir. Any questions for this witness? Thank you for your time. Anyone else here in favor of the bill, informational purposes, in opposition?
Now it's on. Good morning. My name is Heather Luby. I live in Kirkwood, Missouri, but I was born and raised in the Ozark Mountains, so my family's been there for 8 generations. I've called St. Louis my home for 15 years with my husband, who is an Army veteran, and I'm the mother of 2 teen daughters, one of which accompanied me today. I'm here today as a dedicated voter and a concerned parent, and I am opposed to 2428. I'm someone, though, who's had the privilege of meeting Representative Dogan in the past, so I am very certain of his decent character and very well-meaning intentions. And I hope my previous interactions with Shamed, I helped him years ago on a campaign for a short amount of time, will make clear that my opposition to the legislation today is not based on political party or political agenda or any type of cultural grievances. I'm here because I feel like I have some logical concerns that I hope the committee will respectfully consider. First and foremost, I oppose the bill because it is written vaguely, especially in terms of a legislative document. It's similarity in language and intent to many of the bills that are in the country right now, most of which were immediately challenged in court and tie up taxpayer money, resources, time. In New Hampshire, there was a bill that was passed that had almost identical language, and it faced immediate merited legal challenges from the American Federation of Teachers, from the ACLU, and several others. And as of January 12th, that Senate Judiciary Committee has already had multiple bills introduced that are either going to repeal or replace that legislation. That New Hampshire legal challenge and many of the others have been with identical language, have faced these legal challenges on the basis that they restrict teachers' freedom of speech under the First Amendment and that they violate the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, basically due to their vagueness. It's been pointed out time and time again that the vague and general language in these bills do not give any legally precise explanations of what is or is not prohibited in the classroom. And this bill in particular also fails to precisely define the private rights of action and what they could entail. So the vague and at times contradictory language of the bill makes it nearly impossible for teachers to confidently know what they're allowed to teach, especially when it comes to historic and societal concepts such as racism and discrimination. I do have one quick question I'm hoping someone could clarify for me. how does this body define public policy issues of the day? Because I know that when I personally went to go look at the State Department's definition of public policies of the day, I mean, it included like 19. Everything from science, innovation, being united with Ukraine, energy, counterterrorism. I mean, the list was very long. And so I can't help but wonder if we need a student's consent, as the first part of the bill recommends, to discuss policy positions of the day. That would be for just about every subject taught in school. So I feel that in this particular case, teachers are just sort of threatened with vaguely ominous private action against them if they're accused of violating this law. It seems that the state's intent in using this language is actually to intimidate our teachers to a point of silence. There is no avenue that leads to knowledge or produces critical thinking that is constrained by the constant threat of legal action or loss of livelihood. The bill sends a message loud and clear. You do not believe that teachers or the local districts are capable of teaching honest and accurate history without government surveillance. Our public school teachers and support staff, I'm sure you all would agree, are dedicated public servants. They've stepped up. They have spent years and years in training. And now it seems that you want to make them targets for undeserved disciplinary proceedings, possible financial ruin if they're sued in private action and trying to defend themselves on a teacher's salary, all for doing their job in accordance with a curriculum that has actually already been formally adopted by the state. I think the message of distrust will have consequences. We are currently ranked 45th in the country in teachers' pay. I'm not sure I know how many intelligent top-tier teachers will want to continue to teach in this state.
Okay, ma'am, could you wrap it up? So we got a lot of stuff to cover today. So.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to point out two quick things. I want to say that, in New Hampshire, when they passed this bill, Moms of Liberty created and announced on Twitter a CRT bounty to pay private citizens $500 each if they could catch a teacher and turn them in.
Okay, have they said anything about this bill? I've never heard of
The
that group
language
before.
is nearly identical, so
Okay,
I'm
but
pointing it out
you
because
cited a group that is apparently doing something
in New
inappropriate.
Hampshire, but they have
But that's New
thousands of
Hampshire.
chapters,
Is there any group
including
that
in
you know
Missouri.
of that is attacking this legislation in a similar fashion?
They will. And I think that we would be naive to think when it is happening all over the country that it will not happen here.
Okay.
I'm going to end, though, with just one more statement. I grew up actually being a proud Republican. I've helped with Republican campaigns. I've donated to them. I was raised to believe that we were wise enough, that we were wise specifically because we understood that it wasn't the government's job to solve every problem or attend to every grievance, and that even the most well-intended legislation runs the possibility of overreaching and having inevitable and unintended consequences. I think this legislation was thrown together so quickly and so vaguely that there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences that you guys are just not considering. And if you go out and you do the research about what is happening in some of the other parts of the country, legally and in communities, you'll see proof of those unintended consequences. I'm actually not casting any nefarious reasons here. I'm just saying that I think it is really worth taking a step back, rewriting the bill, reconsidering the bill, bringing it to a vote, and even at a later time. But as it is written, it is problematic. It will result in lawsuits, and I do not think it's going to accomplish what you think it will
Okay,
accomplish.
thank you. Any questions for this witness? Hold on just a second. apologize. Representative Stacy.
You know, one of the things you described is talking about the issues of the day. And I know there's certainly a desire to do that in the classroom because that's what would appear to be pertinent.
Yeah, it's sort of impossible
but-
to
yeah.
talk with children and sort of pretend that the world they live in doesn't exist.
But is it the job of the schools to litigate all the things that are going on
Litigate?
today?
I mean, that's kind of a
In the
I mean,
classroom, litigate, because that's really what you're doing. You're talking about, you're trying to make decisions. Is it the job of the school to spend the school time, which is precious? The school time is precious.
it is.
And to spend what some might consider wasted time litigating the issues of the day and not spending time on the curriculum that you're there to study, the curriculum that has been deemed important for these kids to grasp and understand, which may have very little to do with litigating the issues of the day. See, it looks like to me that that we try to make school about this narrow thing about what's going on today, and not about what took place before any of those kids came to school, that they need to find out a little bit about. Which, if you don't spend time doing that, you're going to waste time talking about issues that are going to go away tomorrow.
Well, my first question would be to you is what data did this committee gather to show that time in schools is currently being wasted to a point that is detrimental to the education of these students?
Well, I would say that to the extent.
Any data specifically, or is this just sort of like an anecdotal feeling?
Well,
you have?
because we've had lots of people testify. In fact, you testified that.
Oh, absolutely. But I'm
that-
asking about like data.
Well, I can only go with what people come to this room and say.
So anecdotal.
Well, so you're saying what you're saying is anecdotal.
Sure, it's legally it is anecdotal.
Okay, but we get an impression, whatever it is, in the classroom. Now, by the way, it's not as if I have no understanding of what's going on in the classroom today, or that I have no interest of what's going on in the classroom today. I have both of those things.
Well,
but the
I
point,
would assume so
the
because
point
you're
being,
sitting on this committee.
yeah, the point being, it just seems interesting that we're trying to spend precious time. That there are many things to talk about that have nothing to do with the litigating of the issues of the day. Potentially, it has more to do with what can we learn from the past? Because what can we learn from the past will at some level help us understand the things we're dealing with today.
Well, I think my argument is mostly that we trust teachers who are specifically trained as educators to know the right balance when it comes to their students' both educational and social emotional needs, to present past, present current, present curriculum, and to combine them in a way that is memorable, educational, really sinks in for them, helps them learn the lessons. So my argument is mostly that if teachers spend all of these years going to school to do this, and we certainly don't reward them with, rich salaries and things like that, it's because they do generally care about kids. I mean, I personally don't think that there's a teacher out there on either side who's trying to indoctrinate anybody. I just mostly trust them as professionals, the same way I would trust, doctors. It doesn't mean that as a parent, I can go onto my kid's Schoology account on any given day, and I can see what are they reading? What are the links to them? I talk to her about what they talk about in class. We talk about this at the dinner table. I'm very involved. I know what their curriculum is. Every parent has that ability. If I have a question about something, I can reach out to her teachers? I mean, these are all avenues that already
Well, certainly,
exist that
certainly.
don't require legislation.
What I would say is that that the concern, one of the concerns is that we don't spend a lot of time litigating the issues of the day, which we're going to pass tomorrow. We should be spending the time on the curriculum that's already determined,
And I think that
and
they
go from
are
there.
spending the time on the
Well,
curriculum.
that's
I have
that's
seen
that's where we would disagree
no
at this
evidence
point.
to the contrary, and you admitted yourself that other than some anecdotal stories, you have no evidence to the contrary.
Well, I did not admit that, no, but I thank you for your questions. Thank you.
Representative Hafner
To inquire, Mr. Chairman.
will proceed.
Would anyone mind really fast if I get a cup of water while we're
Please do.
discussing? Thank
Please
you.
do.
Please continue.
Okay. While you're getting your drink of water, I just want to clarify a couple of things. So I do have a copy of the New Hampshire lawsuit that you referenced, and it appears that the issue there is specifically on the First Amendment with the concept of free speech. And I just want to say I appreciate the bill sponsor and the way that he put an incredible amount of thought and time into this bill to make that fairly clear. But to the bill sponsor, we just had a quick conversation, and he's willing to make it very clear about the 14th Amendment. There's a simple statement that could be put in there, because I've got some documentation here, lady, where there's 20 states that have done a parenting Bill of Rights. Of those 20 states, 11 of them, and it states the parenting Bill of Rights has undergone strict scrutiny in the courts and has been upheld. And those that have upheld it have followed this concept of specifically mentioning the First Amendment as well as the 14th Amendment. And I appreciate the bill sponsor. He went through in detail the aspects of the Equal Protection Clause and how that's applicable here. And I think that if the bill sponsor, I know he's willing to sit down and talk with me, I think we can make some minor changes. And gentlemen, we can line this up with what this concept of a strict scrutiny in the courts as it applies to the Parenting Bill of Rights. And I think you're right on line with what needs to be done, and the courts have upheld this. And if, lady, if you would like a copy of this, I can give you a copy of the states. I can give you the ongoing legal cases that are going. I can provide that all to you, but it is being justified within the courts.
Not in all cases, not yet. There is still plenty of pending legislation. There are still many bills that are in committees such as this that have not reached a point where they are going to be subjected to lawsuits. And sometimes even when things are later upheld, will not mean that it will not be challenged. And will
Lady,
not
I
cost
agree
time
with
and
that.
resources.
I guess my comment here is 11 of the 20 states, they're not being challenged in the courts. When we're challenged in the courts, it was upheld as being constitutional. And I think the gentleman has put a lot of thought into this. I think he's on the right track. And we need to go through the legislative process to continue to make it better. And that's what this is about.
Sure. I'm just still going to be in disagreement that I think that legislation is something that is needed. I think in this particular case, you guys are hammers looking for a nail.
We're not going to agree on that, and we can
I
take that
understand.
offline. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Cryer,
To briefly comment,
go ahead, sir.
thank you, Chair. Lady, thank you for being here this morning.
Of
I
course.
appreciate you coming and testifying. I want to acknowledge an important point that you made about the fact that just the idea of trusting professionals, right, and what they do. I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And you likened it to professions like doctors and physicians and healthcare. The difference is, if I'm going to choose which doctor to operate on me, I get a choice. I can do my research, and I can find the best doggone doctor in the entire country to
I mean, I
perform
guess if you have the
an
money for that.
operation. I can go to the hospital that's going to serve my needs the best. We don't have that in education. Unfortunately, parents do
I
not
think-
have the ability to choose
In this
which
way, it is
public
very
school.
similar, right? Because
excuse
if you
me,
have-
excuse me. I didn't interrupt
Okay.
you when you were speaking.
You are correct, and I apologize.
Thank
Please
you.
continue.
The point that I'm making is that parents don't have that choice to choose the professionals that they want to teach their children. They don't have a choice. If they're in the public school system and they don't have the funds to afford to go to a private school, they have no choice. So it is not like the
Very
healthcare
similar
profession.
to healthcare.
not like healthcare, where you can choose which doctor you're going to go to or which doctor is within the system that you have. Whatever healthcare you might have, you do have a plan. You're right. I think I know where you're going with that. But you can choose which doctor you're going to have perform that surgery. I would ask that we have the same choice with our education system and with our kids.
Money
That's
can
all.
buy
So
you
you
a
made a
private
one-
school education just like it can afford you the right kind of health plan to
I'm
choose your
acknowledging
doctor.
you made a wonderful point about the opportunity that we have to trust the professionals. But in order to be able to do that, we have good teachers, we have not so good teachers. Parents ought to have the ability to choose which teachers teach their kids. That's what I would like to see. And we have lots of other curriculum.
So do we think that every parent, and this is a legitimate
Thank you,
question,
Mr. Chair. That's my question.
that
All
every
right,
parent has the
Representative Baker,
opportunity to choose
ma'am,
every
ma'am.
teacher?
Representative Baker, proceed.
To inquire, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm just trying to get a little bit of a clear picture of where you're coming from on this. So is it your position that there is no instances of teachers that are teaching critical race theory or some other idea or some other narrative that may be out there that is from their personal opinion? So it's your position that that's not happening and has never happened in Missouri public schools?
Well, I would answer that two ways. The first is critical race theory in particular. Yeah, I can feel pretty confident that is not being taught anywhere, considering it is an upper graduate level type of multidisciplinary. I mean, I'm a college professor, right? So no, critical race theory is not,
Okay.
going to be taught.
So-
but in terms of ideas, thoughts, narratives, I mean, are teachers human beings? Yes. Should they be allowed to be human beings in their classrooms? I think so.
Okay, I don't disagree with that, but I think
I mean,
that's
They're
going
allowed
totally
to
off track
have
to where.
thoughts and ideas and discuss those with their students.
Of course, we need to be able to discuss thoughts and ideas, of course. But what I'm saying is, it is happening in Missouri public schools in some instances. And you're coming from this perspective that we're creating a problem that doesn't exist. And I think the gentleman mentioned it. There are many bills dealing with this, not only in the state of Missouri, but across the country. And this is coming from the parents, and this is coming from the communities that are not happy with what is being taught in the public schools in some instances. No, it's not everywhere, it's not every teacher, but it is happening. It is happening. Let me give you an example of that. Are you familiar with a consultant group that's called Educational Equity Consultants out of St. Louis?
If you could give me more information.
Okay, I can give
about them.
you the information. They have a website you can go to, and I can give you that information as well. That contains material. Now, this group, this consultant group, consults for school boards and teachers and a lot of different spaces when it comes to education. I'll give you one example of an excerpt from an article on their website that makes this statement. If history has taught me anything, it's that there's nothing more disappointing or dangerous than a room full of white people. Now, would you say that that's an appropriate statement to be taught in Missouri public schools?
In what context? I mean, this is a sentence. I mean, this is like pulling a sentence from any book anywhere. I would really need to know what came in the paragraph or pages before.
Of course,
what comes
context
after.
matters. Of course, context
You
matters.
provide me that context?
Well, I can give it to you. But
Because without that context, I don't feel like I could speak with any certainty
okay, but what I'm
about
saying
whether or
is
not
there
it is
are
appropriate.
instances of people that are influencing educational space in different ways that are pushing an agenda when it comes to some of these
Well,
issues.
Here's my question. You just read that sentence, and I'm sure it was upsetting to you. Have you read?
It's not
what
just
came-
upsetting to me.
Here's
It's
my
upsetting
question.
to a lot of people.
Have you read what came before and after that sentence in the resource that it was provided from?
Yeah, I can get that to you. Absolutely.
No, I'm asking, have you read it?
Yes.
Then please tell me the larger context that it was provided.
I don't have time to go into all the details of that.
I'm sure
okay?
you don't.
But what I'm saying is, and I can give you other instances as well, what I'm saying is there are people who are influencing the educational space with some of these things, and it is happening in Missouri public schools. There are teachers who are teaching personal opinions and ideas and things in their classroom, and that's what we're trying to deal with these bills. So you're coming from the perspective,
You don't
excuse
feel
me,
like-
you're
okay.
coming from the perspective that we're creating a problem that doesn't exist. And I am disagreeing with that, and I'm saying that the reason why we have these bills and the reason why the representative has offered this bill is because there is a problem that the people we serve is saying, you have to do something about this because it's a problem in our schools.
I
So,
think that
so
if it
it's
is-
disingenuous to come here and say that we're creating a problem that doesn't exist. Okay, I have all kinds of
think
things that
ever
I can do with
said
my time other than
unanimously
create
that a
problems that
problem
don't
doesn't
exist.
My point was, is it a problem that it's your job to solve, or that legislation can solve, and that if you write legislation
Okay,
to
let me-
try to solve it, have you contemplated what will be the unintended but
There's
likely
unintended consequences
of
to
it?
everything we do in this building. It happens, okay?
Absolutely.
However, it is our job and our responsibility to oversee these things. We have been tasked with that to a certain degree, okay? If teachers are doing things that they shouldn't be doing and teaching things with indoctrination in our public schools and nothing is being done about it, it is our prerogative to do something or to attempt to do something about it.
Can you tell me approximately how many people have brought these examples to you asking you to do something about
Oh,
it?
I have all kinds of examples.
No, I'm sure you do, but I'm saying, like, what's the number? Is it 100 parents, 500 parents, 20 parents, 1,000 parents? Like, what's that number?
I don't know what the total number is. I can only speak to the people that have contacted me. I can only speak to what I see going on across our state and what across the country in this area. It's one of the top issues right now across the country, and it's an issue for a reason. There was an election that happened just recently in Virginia that it became the number one issue of parents not feeling like they were being heard, and as a result of that, it was a major swing in an election that was really remarkable. So to say that this is a problem that we are creating is absolutely false, and to say that we are just trying to create a problem and these bills are nothing but creating a problem is not, in fact, the case. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we need to start moving along here. We got a lot of stuff to do. Any other questions for this lady? Thank you for your time. Anybody else want to testify on this bill, favor or against? You in favor? And we need to,
I'm asking for another minute in case any of the legislators have questions for me, because we exited before the snowstorm approached.
right, we had to hurry that
was
along. Yeah, go ahead, ma'am.
One, I'd like to point
Quickly,
out the
please.
structure of this bill, and that is that up until Section 3, what Representative Dogan has done is listed the federal laws, the federal civil rights laws that are already in place that people who are teaching according to critical race theory are already violating. Under that section, then, in parenthetical numbers, are the explanation of what it means to implement according to Titles 4 and 6. So all he's doing is explaining what in the state of Missouri Titles 4 and 6 look like, which are currently in federal law. There is nothing new here, all right? And there is no attempt to quash teacher speech. The respect, what I pointed out last week is that it was the Assistant Attorney General of Civil Rights who decided to redefine what race meant, which is already defined by the Office of Management and Budget, which includes whites. And Attorney General Tom Perez said it didn't. And what we have to do is stop the personal interpretation of federal law by ignoring or cherry picking what people don't want to see in other aspects of the law.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Byrne. Any questions? Appreciate it very much. We'll take one more witness in opposition, then we're going to move on.
Good morning. My name is Maggie Klonsky, and I come here today as a parent of elementary school children, an educator, and a leader of a nonprofit organization that supports thousands of families in Missouri and across the country. I've spent almost 20 years in these various roles creating learning partnerships between teachers and students, parents and teachers, schools and communities and schools, and across families in communities with differing ideological viewpoints. These relationships across stakeholders are essential for high-quality educational experiences. This legislation not only undermines the expertise and competencies of public school educators, but it'll erode these strained ties of relationship holding it together. For far too long, our underpaid teachers have shouldered the burden of under-resourced systems in communities, and the pandemic has greatly exacerbated those systems, making the load unbearable for many teachers. Teachers have the responsibility of caring for the children within their care, which often goes beyond providing lessons as they purchase supplies and provisions out of their own pockets to provide children with what they know they need to thrive. And right now, rather than being held up in gratitude for continuing to create safe environments for our children, allowing parents to work while their children learn, they are being demonized. Our overworked teachers, who are stressed mentally and physically from all the expectations that we heap upon them as a society, are now being told they need to be micromanaged. The state already determines the standards taught in our public schools, putting the responsibility on teachers to determine the most effective ways to achieve those standards. Teachers use differentiation to reach students who are often several grade levels apart. And I believe that we need if we want a high-quality workforce, and moreover, if we want our state to attract the brightest and most innovative people to bring or create their businesses in Missouri, we have to build and maintain a desirable public schooling system, or desirable public schooling. Critical thinking, analysis, synthesis, and collaboration are the most important skills. And you know how we accomplish that? Through great teachers who diversify their lesson plans in order to take a standard and craft a lesson that meets this standard. And any teacher will tell you that to make meaningful, deep lessons or deep learning, you need to make the content relevant and you need to make it meaningful and connected to them. So how can you cultivate critical thinking and analysis without talking about conflict or issues and without representing multiple perspectives? As a Missouri resident, I want Missouri to be a state that provides such excellent, high-quality education that we're preparing students for a multicultural, rapidly changing world, and that an education that helps us to attract the brightest and most innovative people to come here for that education. So in conclusion, I oppose House Bill 2428 and the connected legislation.
Okay, any questions for this witness? Thank you, ma'am. That'll conclude the public hearing on House Bill 2428. We're now going to move to Representative Kelly on House Bill 2095. And when Representative Kelly gets done, we're going to limit witness testimony to 2 minutes apiece.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you so much for your time and attention to House Bill 2095. For the record, my name is Hannah Kelly. I represent District 141, which is all of Wright and part of Webster County. House Bill 2095 deals with the fact that currently the law allows local school districts to investigate reports made to the hotline for child abuse involving school personnel. Children's Division is only allowed to investigate these reports if they involve sexual abuse or the local school district decides not to investigate on its own. This bill would allow the Children's Division to investigate all hotline reports involving school personnel, regardless if the report involves sexual or physical abuse. The local school districts would no longer be allowed to conduct internal investigations. And I just want to point you to a few sections of the bill, and in respect to the committee's time, I will keep this as succinct as possible. You will see in section 210.115 that all teachers, principals, and school officials are mandated reporters. And you will see in section 162.069 that no school supervisors or administrators may impede or inhibit reporting to the hotline. And section 210.135 reminds us that any person who intentionally makes a false report does not have immunity from any liability, whether it's civil or criminal. And thank you for your attention to this, what I like to say is a great bill. And with that, I will take any questions from the committee. And the heart of it, when I get away from my talking points, is simply this, that we have a process in this state by which we give our best effort to protect children. I believe the process should be honored by all employees of our public school system. And in doing that, I would hope that we are able to ensure the timeless principle of our country that you are innocent until proven guilty, but also, most of all, ensure the safety of our children and make sure that there's a due process followed. I've talked with many administrators who say, Hannah, we're already doing what you're asking. Unfortunately, I know that not everyone is, so I would like to create a standardization in honoring of the process that we know works. And before it gets brought up probably by some of the very, very attentive members of the committee who pay close attention to the budget end of this in regards to how do we handle all of this being directed to the hotline. And my answer to that is we are looking at the budget very seriously this year in regards to monetary compensation, in regards to encouraging that the department fills the vacancies. And I know that's another conversation for another time. But with that, I would be happy to take any questions and welcome any questions and would appreciate the committee's support.
Just one point or a question. You mentioned a lot of administrators say they're already doing what the bill is intended to do, but there are some that are not.
That is correct.
Right.
Yes, sir. Yes.
One in particular is a school district I've been outspoken on or about. And that's Columbia, is that correct?
Yes, sir. To my understanding, I'm hearing those same things.
I know we got somebody here, a couple people to talk about that. So
Yes.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Brown, go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Simple question.
Mm-hmm.
Does your bill preclude school districts from going ahead with their investigation as well?
Lady, I would need to refer to my language very quickly. It is not something that I'm aware of if it does preclude. Of course, the intent of 2095 is to encourage transparency and encourage safety of the kids. If you'll allow me to check here, lady, and then come back to you after I just double check my language. But to my knowledge, it does not.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one more thing, and then you can zip through your stuff. So, the budget that you're talking about is this one-time money, or are you actually putting in? Is the budget item to pay for the social workers to investigate? Will that be like ongoing budget, or are we going to use one-time money for that?
So in my reference to budget is in regards to the fact that we have a governor's recommendation for a pay plan increase, and we have much discussion going on within budget about that right now. And I know that that is a completely different and diverse conversation in and of itself, but I would remind the committee that we have large vacancies within our department.
Right.
And so I believe that because of the great leaders within the department that we have currently at the helm, that with implementing what the House and Senate ultimately decide and send to the governor's desk, of course, in regards to the supplementals and the incoming budget, with implementing of our incoming budget, but also with the hard work of the leadership within this department, because I go back to money is never the answer completely. And the leadership within the department fully understands that we have vacancies that must be filled. I don't believe creating, there's some discussion about what this would take. I would be willing to bet that with the hard work the department is committed to putting out to make sure the vacancies are filled, we will see that this is not going to be too big of a bite of the apple. But I welcome all continuing conversations in regards to how we pay for the responsibilities at hand, which, of course, primarily in reference to this are keeping our kids safe and creating accountability for the institution of public education that our children need access to every day.
How many vacancies do we have right now? Do you know?
I can't quote that, but I can get that back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, lady.
Representative Nerman,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To inquire.
go ahead.
Good morning, lady.
Good morning.
I appreciate your bill before us this morning, and I really appreciate all the work that you've been doing and continue to do and really fighting for our kids. So thank you for that. I wanted to bring something up as I was reading this legislation. Would you go to page 5 of your bill? I'm on line 146. And as I was looking through this and trying to figure out what your language would do, right? I was pretty shocked to see, I'm on line 146, to see that our school personnel can still spank children in their schools. Did you know that, lady?
Yes.
Okay, so there we go on number 146, spanking when administered by certified personnel and in the presence of a witness who is an employee of the school district. Okay, so there's that piece. And then the reasonable force to protect persons or property, I think that really speaks to the work that we did last year in terms of safe seclusion and restraint and making sure that all those protocols are in place, that if that has to happen. But I still don't know why in 2022 spanking is allowed. What are your thoughts on that? Or would that be would you be willing to have a conversation with me offline to see if that's something that we could adjust at the same time, since we're opening this section?
I'm going to be very, very frank with you. I feel like that at the point in time that we've had the ability to work together, that I am always open to a conversation. My primary concern is always to be effective in our work and in our outcomes. And I've had many people talk to me about many different sections that could potentially be tagged onto this conversation because of what we're opening here in our conversation with this bill.
Okay.
There's diverse opinions at the table about what you've just expressed, as you and I both know. My goal is to get this done. And I am concerned that if we bring on many other conversations onto this bill, and this is being very selfish, I know, but I would like to keep this very centrally focused to the matter at hand in regards to making sure that schools cannot internalize investigations and keep them from the due process that the state knows is structured with the best intent and outcome for children and the safety of children. I understand there's many, many conversations that come into opening this chapter.
Sure.
And all of them should deserve their fair day in court, for lack of a better term of putting it. But I beg of the committee to help me get this out to the floor, because we have too many situations in this state where they're internalizing investigations, and I would really hate to see lots of well-intended conversations happen and then the ship sink before we can pull it into harbor, correct?
Sure. Lady,
but I would love to have a conversation. As you can tell, I get all worked up.
Sure.
But,
no, I get worked up too, and people criticize me for that sometimes. So I appreciate your passion. I'm serious when I say that. So,
I would welcome the conversation. I can't always promise that we're always going to see the same on every issue, but again, as you know, I'm always open to a conversation. But I would, for the record and for the body's consideration, ask that we keep this to the singular subject at hand for the sake of pulling it across the line, for the sake of the safety of our kids and transparency of the institutions. So
I want to hone in what you just said, for the safety of our kids. Lady, when I was a teacher, I hotlined a school administrator because I felt like they were not following, not following school policy, but simply not being safe and not what I would say was honestly in violation of probably many things that hopefully are in statute. With that being said, I cannot possibly fathom a time when spanking is appropriate. That's why we've talked about safe seclusion and restraint. So when you talk about welfare of kids, this is the stuff I'm talking about. To think that somebody today could continue, like when we talk about corporal punishment and protecting our kiddos, that's crazy that that's still permissible, right? If there's a child who's truly, and I can speak to this very well, a child who is truly is in a mental health crisis, is, like I say, truly in crisis, right? And they can no longer keep themselves safe or others safe or property safe. That's why we put that in place, right? In terms of really watching out for this. But I do feel like this is in spirit of the legislation that you're trying to push. And I think it actually helps our cause because, again, if I were to see somebody, I remember that. I mean, when I was, here I am almost 38. I mean, I remember our principal with that paddle and going to that, and not that he actually would use it, thankfully, back in, I think 1989 was the first time I went to the principal's office as a kindergartner. But I remember him saying like, hey, if you come back here with that gum in your mouth, right? But to think that actually could happen today still, and again, in the year 2022. So again, I appreciate the spirit of what you are trying to do here, but I think that this actually supports protecting our kids. Okay, and I would be.
I will welcome any conversation, lady, that you would like to have. Just as I told someone this morning, though, I am not. I do not participate in making promises that I can't assure you I can keep.
Yep, I absolutely.
And so, welcome the conversation. Let's have the conversation, and would welcome any
And
further
if we need to do
conversations
that,
from
you
the
know,
committee.
I think we can certainly do this at the same time. But again, just another thing. A lot of times when we open up chapters, I start looking at this. I'm like, this is fascinating. I appreciate that you can bring a Civil War era. You know, somebody there's all sorts of different things when we were opening this chapter that I was looking at. For with the firearm language in there, that if there's somebody who's a reenactor, that you could bring that Civil War weapon. I'm like, well, that makes sense, right? That's history. That's learning through real artifacts. So there were some things I thought, well, that's a pretty cool thing. But then when I get to the spanking piece on line 146, I was just shocked to see that still. So thank you, lady. Appreciate your work.
The conversation. Thank
Okay.
you.
Representative Sharp,
To inquire.
go ahead.
Just want to say thank you for being here again, Representative. This bill is similar to some legislation from last year.
Yes,
looks
sir.
like. What were some pitfalls from last year, and have there been any changes that you've made to the bill since then?
Gentlemen, I have to be honest with you. I do not have those details in front of me, but I can report back to you with that, and I could be happy to report to the committee with that as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Representative? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just a quick announcement to the committee. We are, again, time constraints. We'll be hopefully finishing a couple more bills, but we will be coming back to HR 1 at 2 p.m. To finish the business of the committee. The first witness in support of this bill. And we're going to try and keep it about 2 minutes apiece if we could. I hate to do that to people that have traveled in, especially the parents. But go ahead, ma'am.
All right, do my best. Good morning. My name is Jessica Seitz, and I'm the Executive Director of Missouri Kids First. We are the state network of child advocacy centers, and my members serve kids that have an open case of child abuse and neglect that's being currently investigated.
Ma'am, could you get the mic closer? Because thank you.
Okay, better?
Yeah.
All right. It's on. Yeah, I'm just low talking this morning. Okay, I don't want to repeat anything. Representative Kelly did a great job explaining it, but I did think that the summary read a little bit confusing, so I just wanted to kind of clarify what this bill would do. It would align the way that child abuse and neglect is investigated when it's perpetrated by school personnel with the way that child abuse is investigated everywhere else, in every other case. Under current statute, which is very outdated, it's old language, public schools, not Children's Division, are authorized to investigate themselves in cases of child abuse perpetrated by school personnel other than cases of sexual misconduct. Very narrow, just sexual misconduct. So not even suspicion of sexual suspicious activity. So if a report comes in, Children's Division notifies the school superintendent or school board president, and the school would do an investigation of themselves. And down the road, it outlines a whole separate investigation process, and then Children's Division would be expected to accept a substantiated or unsubstantiated request. So my organization is committed to ensuring, we've worked on a couple of bills, one before this committee 2 years ago, 3 years ago maybe, about Pass the Trash. We're committed to protecting our kids against abuse in schools. I think particularly abuse committed by trusted school personnel. We've made great progress, but loopholes exist. Clearly this is one of them. It's outdated language, and I think it's time to update it. So I welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for this witness? Appreciate it. Is there anyone here to testify in opposition to House Bill 2095? Anyone here for informational purposes? Next witness in support of House Bill 2095. Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Gamble? Thank you very much, sir. Next witness in support of the bill. Is the green light on your mic?
Is that better?
Yeah, there we go.
Can you hear me better?
Yeah.
Do I need to repeat anything? Okay. We asked and were granted access to the one cell phone video that was illegally recorded by an employee caught on surveillance camera. One of two videos. This video, where you see Booth's elbow leave the frame of his body, you do not see the fist make contact with our son. However, you do hear him scream in pain when Booth's fists make contact with his shoulder. And as his fist comes back into the view of the cell phone footage, he's screaming, pushing up against him as Booth is using his fist to shove him to the floor. When we watched the core surveillance footage, the teacher was blocking the hallway camera, and we could not see our son very well. We could not see his assailant assaulting him. This was why school districts should not be able to investigate themselves. Regardless, we have still been baffled that OHI has found the allegations unsubstantiated, even though CPS has done their own investigation and found some of those employees guilty. So we have seen the pros and cons to both sides of investigation. Since CPS has chosen not to take action against Mr. Booth and insists that our son should return to CORE, he has not been in seat with CPS since the incident occurred in mid-September. We have had to file upwards of 20 grievances with the Human Resources Department with the Columbia Public Schools, just to address some of the issues that we have experienced, to include forgery, falsified documentation, abuse, retaliation, failure to communicate, for violations of FERPA, FAPE, IDEA. To date, we have heard back from them regarding 6 of our complaints. 3 of them were guilty verdicts by Human Resources for incidents of abuse that occurred at Rosetta. All 3 of those employees are still currently employed with Columbia Public Schools and still reside in the positions that they
Could you, not to interrupt you, could you explain what Rosetta is? And just let the Cooney know, I've met with this lady privately, so I'm explain what Rosetta is so the committee knows what that is, please.
Yes. Rosetta and CORE both are part of a QUEST program, as Columbia Public Schools likes to call it. It's not a program, it's a seclusive building. It's where they send behavior-oriented children to a building with locked doors, bars on the windows, where staff are trained to tackle them if they were trying to elope the building, where our son has been illegally restrained on numerous occasions. No cause for emergency restraint, as your bills have passed in the last year. They're not supposed to be doing seclusion or restraint without an emergency. Columbia Public Schools is taking full advantage of that law, not going into effect yet. They are still aggressively restraining these kids. My child was also subject to a seclusion room at Rosetta, no bigger than a small office space, one window which was blocked off with drywall, and a window on the door which was blocked to the outside, which are all against seclusion protocol. He has also been blocked from passing through the building freely, which is part of seclusion law. So seclusion law states that you cannot block egress for a student. And on several occasions, numerous staff members have blocked my son from being able to egress freely throughout the building. He has autism, 11 years old, 100 pounds. So his coping mechanisms include pacing, sensory, tactile stimulation. He very desperately needs that sensory input and the ability to pace throughout the building. And he's been restrained simply for doing that, particularly at extended school year at Rockbridge, where core staff was working with him. He paced on the first day of ESY, even after a lengthy conversation of his BIP, his behavior intervention plan, that this is a necessary coping mechanism. And they restrained him for pacing in a hallway because he wasn't in seat in class, being submissive and doing what he was told.
Okay, thank you. I know it's hard for you to talk about this, but when your son was, when the gentleman, Mr. Booth, struck him, what was he doing prior to that?
My son or Mr. Booth?
No, your son.
Colton was in the midst of a meltdown. He was dysregulated, which is very common with autism when he gets overwhelmed. They had recently just left the lunchroom from, I believe it was breakfast, or they were going to the lunchroom. The facts are very smeared. What we received from Columbia Public Schools is very different depending on who you talk to. But our understanding was he was trying to make his way to the lunchroom. And when you come into the core building, the door's locked on entry. There's a secretary behind a window with a locked door into her office area. And there is a locked door that remains open for the majority of the time that will lead you down to the core classrooms at the end of the hall. He was coming through that doorway when he was caught on surveillance footage in the lobby. His immediate instructor, Mr. Ventris Owens, blocked the camera view immediately once he entered the space, as a para stopped Colton from being able to come through the doorway. As that para was using her entire body, also a larger woman, was using her entire body to prevent him from egressing through the doorway, which is, again, seclusion. You're not allowed to do that. There's no reason to do that. All the doors in this building are locked. He's not going to go anywhere. So as Mr. Owens was blocking the camera footage, Mr. Booth came from down the hallway to trace Colton and got involved with the other para. He took over because he is the de-escalation specialist at CORE. He proceeded to use his entire body to push Colton up against the wall to prevent him from being able to egress through the doorway. Once he was not able to do that, because Colton's real squirmy, he'll do anything to manipulate and get away from you. I'm like, get away from me. He just wants to hide. He wants to go under a table, under a chair. He just wants to get away. You're scaring him. That's his fight or flight kicking in. So at this point, he was laying on the floor, and Mr. Booth was using his leg literally to restrain him, as you can see on the illegally obtained cell phone footage that the employee took. During this time, you can also hear him crying in pain, he's in pain because his leg is on top of him. I mean, Mr. Booth is a pretty big guy. And at that point, Colton had screamed out multiple times. He did not remove his leg, and Colton bit him on his leg. Upon him biting him, Mr. Booth then proceeded to punch him. You can see the elbow leave the frame of his body, and you can see the fist on his shoulder as he pushes him, as he was already on the floor. He was already laying on the floor. There was no reason to do what he did. He literally pushed my son's body onto the floor until his face was like this. And you can see it in the footage. You can see my son's cheek pushed up against the tile of the floor. And you see this man proceed to push on his shoulder as my son screamed in pain. And a paraprofessional said, "We need to get the nurse in here. He bit him." I'm sorry? Since when is a staff's health more important than a son or a child? This is not okay with me. No one took care of our son that day. They hid all of the details.
Thank you. Representative Tolson-Reich.
To inquire.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, Crystal. For the record, you're my constituent.
I am.
We've had some communications. We have met face-to-face in this matter.
We have.
Recently, you had given me a lot of documentation. I was to meet with the superintendent of CPS last week, but he failed to show up. But we did talk by phone, and the superintendent claimed that he knew nothing of your child's story. He knew nothing about you and all the emails and camping out in the superintendent office for 3 days straight. So we have another meeting scheduled this Friday where I will be hand delivering all the documentation that you emailed him personally that he claims he never saw, never got, never read. And when we met in person, I cried for your story. This is horrible. This is unacceptable. And people wonder why I say what I said a week ago in this committee, because I hear the stories. I listen to the parents and these children and what is going on to them. And I want to thank you for coming forward, because this is not easy. And we'll see if the superintendent shows up for his appointment this week that he sets. And maybe he'll at least read your emails now.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you. I can assure you that the Board of Education and the superintendent are well apprised of the issues we've experienced. In addition to several email correspondences, I've also sent all of them certified letters and received a signature response that they were received.
Thank you. Representative Brown, go ahead.
Thank you for being here. My youngest child has some similar issues, so meltdown was a word I could connect with.
For lack of a better term.
Yeah, I never knew what to call it. And while his diagnosis isn't the same, there were still some issues. So we put, that law passed last year.
It doesn't go into effect until July, I believe.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I meant to follow up with you. Curtis looked it up. It takes effect July 1st of this year.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so I guess my question is at the time we were working through the other legislation, CORE was like a purchase service?
High Roads, I believe is what you're referring to, or one of my mode mamas would probably know better than me what the name of that place was. I was not here when it was operating. Focus, maybe? Focus? Does that sound familiar? Catapult. There you go.
Oh,
it was
okay,
called
that
Catapult.
is the word. Okay.
CORE is the one that is owned and operated by Columbia Public Schools. It is called the Center of Responsive Education. That's what CORE stands for. Center of Responsive Education.
All right, so I'm just trying to get a picture. I have not been there. I will be there to visit within the next few weeks. Doors are all locked.
Yes.
And is your son a flight risk at other, he's trying to get away because of what he's feeling inside. Is that his typical mode of, because like my kid would literally zip his hoodie up under the table and pull his hood over.
He'll hide in a recycling bin if you'll let him.
Okay, so his typical mode of operation is to under a table, in a corner, just to be left alone.
Fight or flight, yep.
Okay,
He
and so
just wants to
typically-
be left alone. In his
Okay.
BIP and his behavior intervention plan, it specifically indicates when he reaches the state of fight or flight that they are supposed to back away and give him space and coping mechanisms, none of which was done in this instance or any to my knowledge.
Okay, and all the doors are, you said all the doors are locked except one?
All of the outside doors, anything that creates egress to the outside of that building is locked. Every single door to the outside of that building is locked. And when I say elopement, I use that in a very light term. Columbia Public Schools uses a lot of things to their advantage, and using the term elopement in documentation is one of those things. They frequently document a student for eloping when they leave a classroom. They call elopement getting up out of your desk. I come from Iowa. That's not elopement. That's fight or flight response. Elopement is when he leaves the building and a police response is required. That is elopement. In the state of Missouri, our son has never eloped. Never. However, that is not the CPS definition of elope. Their definition is he left the classroom, he left his desk, he ran away from staff.
But never got out of the building?
Never. Not even in a general education building at Alpha Heart, where he wasn't even medicated for 3 months because the nurse negligent and lost or stole his pills and didn't give them to him for 3 months. And that was the whole reason he got placed at Rosetta in the first place. Because he hid from them for an hour. They lost my child.
All right, thank you. I'm just trying to get a clear picture. Thank
I
you for
appreciate the
being here.
questions.
And just to clarify, Alpha Heart is one of the elementary schools in Columbia, Representative Durenburn.
In my district.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ma'am, I am heartbroken to hear what you've gone through.
Thank you.
And what I heard as you were sharing that, it's kind of like Mama Bear kicks in, right? And all you want is to protect your little cub.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, it was just so I know that's tough to share what you shared, but I thank you for that. Because what you did today, it's not just to fight for Colton. It's also fighting for other kids that are in that situation, other families that don't know how to voice their concerns. I share a lot in this committee oftentimes, but just, I guess just openly, I think it's important. I have a son who has ADHD, and his diagnosis is also he has tendencies towards aggression and impulsion. And I know very well, and this is why I'm so passionate about these issues, is that we have to do better when it comes to having policies in place that keep everybody safe. And one of the things that's most important is when a kid truly is in crisis, we have to have people that are trained to know how to respond.
With patience and grace.
I mean, it is when I have done since probably the last 5 years, and I did master's work in this area. It's very different from having that research perspective to then experiencing it with my own child. And I think it's starting about at age 2, we started getting different therapies and different helps for him. And, I am sickened to hear that this is happening. And I heard my colleague, Representative Brown, say, I'd like to visit. I'd like to sit down in those conversations. We have incredible programs that are happening across the state in other school districts. I think about the special school district that I had the chance to visit on our freshman bus tour, that they have those spaces, they have sensory rooms. If a kid's in crisis, the last thing they need to do is being pinned down to a ground, right? They need to have whatever it takes for those coping strategies a lot of times my kid, the best thing for him to do is he calls it his anger catcher bag, but it's like a sensory bag that he goes and grabs, and it's his music that he puts on. It's his magic eye that he goes and looks at. It's his poppets. It's his gum that he needs to chew, even though gum's not allowed in school, right? Like it's all of those things that are so important. And it's opposite of what you may think. When I was a teacher, a lot of times I got tasked because I appreciated these students so much that I was on so many different 504s and IEPs, and many times I had the students that were sometimes the most difficult to educate. So when we talked about oppositional defiant disorder, that's something I honestly, until I experienced it, I don't know if I believed, but seeing is believing, right? And so when I had a kiddo, you would read the a new kid, right? Your kid has been here I heard you said that you came from Iowa less than a year ago.
Yes. True. Yes.
I can't even begin to explain just how disappointing it is that this has been your reality. I mean, these kiddos, we have to do better. We have to be better trained, but we have to ensure that whether it's not just training, it's not just, it's the resources, it's having the physical space, whether that's, some sort of capital improvements. Kids have to, as we have more kiddos who are on the autism spectrum, as we have more kiddos who are suffering from really severe social emotional, we need to respond to that. And I feel like we're stuck back in 1950, where it's like, oh, pin it down, lock it down. No, you need to get out and walk. I mean, I had one student who was a huge man. I'm 5'2" and probably don't weigh, 115. And this guy was literally like 300 pounds, and I had this student, and I remember when I saw his IEP, and one of the things, and a 504, was one of the things like, hey, if he gets angry, make sure you let him leave. And I thought, of course I'm going to let him leave. I would be the last one to stand and say, but having that, and we were trained at our school. He had a hallway he could go walk. He just needed to be safe and walk.
It is literally written in our son's IEP.
Yeah.
Don't touch him, and if he elopes, to let him run. If he leaves campus, call the police. Do not tackle him. Do not put your hands on him. You will only make matters worse. At CORE, he is 2 blocks away from Los Margaritas. He is 2 blocks away from The Grind, all places he is perfectly comfortable with going, where we have been, where the staff is apprised of him and his presence and aware of all of his quirky behaviors, and they know how to contact me. There is absolutely zero reason why they should be restraining him for access to a locked door.
Yep. So what I again, just thank you for that really passionate testimony, but also I think that what you've done today is really tasked all of us with a call to action.
I appreciate that. And for what it's worth, I fully support your conversation with Hannah Kelly, and I'd love to be a part of it.
Okay, yeah, I know, and I say that
bills
sincerely.
could
I'm
use
like,
a number of
oh my
amendments.
goodness, we need to. And there's certainly a time for safe restraint. I get that, right? Like if it's getting to the point where my kid's going to get hurt, or somebody else is going to get physically hurt, or severe property destruction. I'm not talking about ripping up paper. Sometimes you just got to rip up paper. I remember giving one of my students my grade book. I said, buddy, go to town. If you need to rip it up, you feel better doing that, go for it. But again, there is a time and a place, and we have certainly experienced that in our own family when we have to make sure everybody else is safe. Spanking, there's not. Here we are in 2022. We have to do better. We're not stuck back.
Well, and I believe that the reason that these staff members are likely getting away with this behavior is because they believe corporal punishment is still legal in Missouri.
Yeah.
What are they going to do to me?
Yeah, and one of my colleagues was texting me during this. It is. I mean, I know that term spanking. It's whatever somebody chooses to do in their family, right? That's their prerogative with their own kid. This is really talking about hitting.
Right.
Our children.
You can't beat the autism out of a child.
Yep.
You cannot. It
So
is
when
a
we're talking about
disability.
hitting,
It will
when
not
we're
correct
talking
the
about
behavior.
punching, I mean, that's sickening. So, okay. Well, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Representative Official.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've mentioned several times about the building being locked.
Yes.
How big is the building? Is this classrooms, or is this, how is it set up?
Generally speaking, CORE, Columbia Public Schools gets CORE through the loophole of maintaining general education because they house a preschool there. The intention of the law of students needing to have access to general education is the expectation that they're exposed to general education peers so that there are positive role models. They fit through that loophole by housing a preschool in that building. So as you
There's
walk...
multiple classrooms.
Yes,
I'm
there
thinking
is.
of more of a mechanical and legal
Yeah.
point. The doors are locked so the kids can't get out.
Right.
When I go to my grandkids' school, the doors are locked so I can't get in.
Right.
Are they
Both.
also locked both ways?
Yes, they are.
How does that meet fire code? And if it's a classroom type building, how do you evacuate a building?
I would
Timely.
definitely
Do they
empower
have-
you to look into that.
Yeah, do they, has your son been through any kind of evacuation training or anything?
Not to my knowledge.
That could be a tragedy just in that one case where they're locked in
They
and the people outside are locked out.
There's a button above the doorway, so you imagine what's a doorway? 8 feet? there's a button right about that level that they have to push to open the door to leave the building. So most of the students are not tall enough to reach the button. Our son is defiant enough to try to jump and reach it.
Thank you for coming. That's interesting.
Not for a lack of trying. He has definitely pushed the boundaries. However, I do understand that some of the classrooms do have unlocked doors that go into a fenced yard area. However, our son was never given access to that, so I'm not sure how that works.
That's
He
something
was
we
only
need to
in
look
attendance
into.
for a
Thank
couple
you.
weeks. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for this witness? Thank you much for your time.
Thank you.
Next witness in support of the bill.
Hi, my name is Melissa Little. I'm also a transplant to the Columbia, Missouri area, and I am here to support House Bill 2095. Hey, honey, how was school today? Mom, there's this teacher at school today, and she was like dragging this kid down the hall by his arm. Oh, really? Who was the kid? He's one of the kids with autism like Terry, Mom. He's nonverbal too. Or, Mom, I was in the lunchroom and this teacher was shoving something in this kid's mouth and slamming his arms on the table to get him to sit down. Oh. Mom, what is wrong with these teachers? Mom, we don't do that to my brother at home. If my 10-year-old can come home and vividly tell me how a child is being abused and mishandled, then we can assume that staff are seeing these things as well. We shouldn't assume, though, and I never do. So I begin to ask open-ended questions to my child to get more information and make a better informed decision on the allegations. What other teachers were around? Where did this happen? Did any other teachers see it? To my surprise, yeah, Mom, the office lady, she said, "Get these kids out of here." When my daughter brought the attention of the abuse to other students and began to point. An entire 5th grade class watched as one of their special needs peers were abused in a lunchroom, while other staff witnessed and no reports were made. We already have staff and teachers who are not reporting abuse when they see it. They are fearful of retaliation, losing their jobs, and interrupting relationships within the workplace. Then you add in a superintendent who claims he never receives any information. He has the power to investigate the abuse and decide if the allegations are founded. These are the same people who, when they find the abuse, offer a resignation, and then these people go to other districts and they continue their patterns somewhere else, and other children are being affected. It is affecting my daughter's ability to learn because she feels like she has to protect these children that are just like her brother. It is vital that we have an outside agency like the Children's Division to be the entity that makes a determination on abuse, people that are trained. Having an outside agency fully investigate would alleviate the many issues that we are seeing within our very own school district. Again, Columbia Public Schools.
Thank you, Mrs. Little. You said you moved into the Columbia area. Were you in Missouri before?
No, I'm originally from Chicago, and we spent 5 years in Idaho, and we left Idaho due to the lack of resources. So when moving, we looked at multiple different states in different areas to where we knew that our children could get better autism services, and that was Columbia. To our surprise, the school district does not match the level of medical care that our children are having.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Any questions for this lady? Appreciate it. Next witness in support of the bill.
Hi, thank you for meeting us with us today. I just wanted to take away from the clinical thought. This is my kid. He's 8 years old right now. His name is Eli. I am here as a parent. I am here as a substitute teacher in my school district, and I'm also a CASA volunteer. I work with foster kids.
Could you state your name, ma'am?
I'm
please?
Tracy Block, yes. And I'm here to advocate for my 8-year-old son. I'm here in support of House Bill 2095, and I want to explain why this is so important to me that it passes, but also you will hear about corporal punishment in here too. I'm specifically talking about House Bill 2095, though, today. My son attends the Rolla Public School District, and when he was 6 years old in first grade, he was spanked by the principal while he was having an autistic meltdown. The principal admitted what he had done, and he said he wasn't proud of it, but he added that the spank snapped him right out of his meltdown. We had a meeting with the principal. We discussed how to make sure this doesn't happen again. And at the time, we didn't report it because we thought we'd worked it out privately. We thought that it was a one-time thing. Unfortunately, when my son moved to second grade, he had another meltdown that had the principal coming to assist. The principal admits that my son did not comply or stop his meltdown, and so by that point, I was just done, so I spanked him. In this episode, my son was spanked at least 3 times. All of the swats were administered in the heat of the moment, all of them without permission, without remorse, and fully outside of the parameters for how policy dictates that swats can be given. In fact, my son doesn't even qualify for our district's corporal punishment policy due to his disability. But my husband had to pick my son up that day because the swats weren't enough. He also got suspended for having his meltdown. I asked the principal for a write-up of the discipline report, and I wanted to see the hallway camera where the spankings took place. The principal responded that I could not see the hallway footage because of privacy reasons, but if we had concerns of how the situation was handled, we should call Child Abuse Hotline. He provided the number in an email. We first contacted the superintendent, and after the superintendent admitted that corporal punishment policies were broken, then we called the hotline. However, Child Services did not investigate that day. They really surprised us when they told us that the school district gets to investigate itself when things happen in the building like this. After the investigation was complete, the deputy superintendent repeatedly told us that he used every available resource in his investigation. But we can list several resources that they say they never used. Teachers and staff who witnessed the spankings were never interviewed. My son was never talked to, and he still has his job as the principal of this school. We've been told that we cannot find out what the investigation revealed because it is a matter of HR confidentiality, so we just have to trust them. As a mom, I can't let this go. I believe that the school's internal investigation was insufficient, and we need a third-party investigation, but that has been denied to us. The law that allows schools to investigate themselves has to be overturned to keep matters like this from being swept under the rug. And so, as an ending statement, we've talked about corporal punishment. I know that there is House Bill 1937 right now for ending corporal punishment. I would love to see that get picked up as well. So,
Ma'am, have you consulted an attorney?
we have.
And they can't get the,
It's ongoing.
okay.
But the fact that we cannot get an investigation, that's
Okay.
not going to happen.
And this is in Rolla Public?
Yes.
Mark Twain? Okay. Representative Brown?
Thank you for being here. I want to make sure I clarify something. Did you say that the SWATs took place in the hall?
2 of them did.
With witnesses?
Well, we asked to see the camera footage. That was denied. We threatened a FERPA complaint. We did not actually have to file one. After we threatened the complaint, we were able to see the footage. However, there is no footage. The camera clicked on after the SWATs took place. You can see my son walking down the hallway after it happened with the principal. So as far as it being the hallway,
on and off?
They're motion censored, and so I have not tested them myself, but that is what we've been told.
I would think that a spanking might trigger the camera. Okay. So what did it take for you to get the footage finally that showed you nothing?
Well, we had been having conversations with the administration, and we had researched the laws. I had some friends helping me with that. We talked to someone at DESE, and then we decided that we were going to threaten a FERPA complaint, and then they said, oh, okay, you can come in and see it.
Okay, I have one more question, and I'm going to apologize to the mother who I questioned before because I didn't ask this question. What is it like in the morning when your child gets up to go to school?
Very heavy question. I do have the ability to take him out of school, but he likes it and he learns. He does do very well there. He's very social and he has friends. His teachers are amazing. We actually had an emergency IEP meeting where we amended who he is allowed to deal with. So certain people in the building are not allowed to have contact with him right now. And his team, his IEP special needs team, they have done a very good job at making sure that the right protocols are followed from this point forward. So I do have confidence that who he's with is taking care of him. I can't say the same for other students.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that his team is doing a great job and that he's happy to go to school each morning, because sometimes that is almost the biggest issue for parents when their child gets up and they cry every morning that they don't want to go to school. So I am at least relieved to hear that about your son.
We've explained very clearly that he does not have to deal with certain people, and he trusts the people he does deal with. So that makes it very easy for him to go to school.
Great. I'm glad to hear that at least. And thank you for coming up to testify.
Representative Nirenberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to comment, you know, one of the things that you said and several of the other moms said too was just the importance of that third party. And I cannot stress this enough. You know, I was thinking about oftentimes if there's a police department, you know, I live in Kansas City Police Department, if there's a police involved killing or shooting, right? It's our state police, our highway patrol that comes in and is that third party, right? You should never be investigating something that is happening within your own jurisdiction, right? That's why we need that third party to come in and be that more neutral party in the investigation. But what you all are saying today is just making me think as well that when I look at this, even the legislation and other things that we do here in this committee, is just the need to honestly incorporate some more teeth to this and penalties. We look at a lot of bills with penalties, and I struggle with some of them. But this is a place where what you all are outlining today, and I certainly have seen this in every field. We've seen it is we know there are bad actors out there, and there are some people that have no place in the space of education in any capacity. And so I will talk with the sponsor about this a little bit more, but you know, what you all are speaking to is truly criminal behavior. And, you know, if a police officer can be removed from their job, if we can censor one of our House members, if we can kick them out of this body, if we can't, you know, I had a Catholic priest, our parish priest was a child pedophile, and he was appropriately defrocked, right? We have got to put some teeth in here. These people do not have any right to ever step into a classroom again, is how I see that. So thank you again for playing that role as Mama Bear. I know there's some other people here too, so moms, dads, kiddos, any concerned guardians. I appreciate you guys fighting for your kids today. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Thank you so much for being here, ma'am. Next witness in support of the bill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I am Robin Shelp, representing Missouri Disability Empowerment, or MODE. MODE is a grassroots disability advocacy organization. When we, a group of mothers, formed MODE, we had no plans to focus on special education legislation, but we quickly discovered the need. We were told there wasn't anyone in Jefferson City advocating specifically on behalf of the 120,000 students with disabilities in Missouri public schools. This bill is not a special ed bill, although if you've noticed, every parent who's testified had a child in special education. It significantly impacts students with disabilities. Children with disabilities are 3 times more likely to be abused than their typically developing peers, and 5 times more likely to be sexually abused. I have received too many emails from parents like these explaining abuse their children have faced and how the schools have ignored or covered up this abuse. I was talking to my husband, and he said, I don't understand how a school could cover this up. Would they really do that? And so I'm going to share with you my story, because I know firsthand that some administrators will hide abuse. When I was a senior in high school, a coach I had worked with for 4 years made advances towards me. I tried to ignore it, but a handwritten letter telling me that I better show up at the coach's house over the weekend or not return to class Monday was where I had to stop pretending it would all just go away. I went to my guidance counselor, who fought for me. My principal, his suggestion was to destroy the letter. He didn't want any proof that this had happened. Thankfully, the teacher did resign, and any physical or sexual abuse was stopped before it could happen. I owe my protection to my mother and to my guidance counselor, who didn't back down, not to the principal, whose duty was to protect me. Abuse happens in our schools. Ignoring the truth and hiding abuse happens in our schools. We must have outside investigations. Please support this bill. Thank you. And I do want to address Representative Brown's question. What does it feel like to send your kid? Well, let me tell you what it feels like as the kid to go into a school knowing there's a teacher there who's done wrong. Let's just leave it with that. I was never physically touched, yet the day I knew I had to go into school and this teacher was there, I walked in with my heart racing, unable to breathe, having almost a panic attack, knowing I just had to make it to the guidance counselor's office because she was going to take me out of the building so they could deal with it. I cannot imagine what it is like for our children to have to go back to these situations, our young children. I was 17, and I wasn't touched. What about these little ones that are touched? You can't learn in that kind of situation. So we owe it to our kids to protect them.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions for this witness? Appreciate it. Next witness in support of the bill. We got time for just a couple more.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, Craig Stevenson with Kids Win Missouri. The heart-wrenching stories that we've heard, I don't have anything necessarily to add other than that, just for parity's sake, we think at Kids Win Missouri that whether it be a foster parent, teacher, a citizen, a pastor, the investigation of abuse and neglect needs to be in one spot, and would appreciate consideration, and thank Representative Kelly for the bill.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Stevens? Thank you. Next witness in support of the bill.
So, my name is Luke Barber. I'm from the Des Peres 63131 zip code, and I am in support of this bill with modification because what people don't know is that students with disabilities can actually stay in high school up to age 21. So if a child is above 18, they then fall under adult protective services versus children's protective services. So it would be responsible to include both entities in this bill based off the age of the child. Another thing is that according to the Department of the United States Health and Senior Services, in 2009, statistics said that 11% of all suspected child abuse or adult abuse occurred to people with disabilities. Another issue that Representative Nuremberg brought up was the issue of spanking. Currently, it is considered reasonable punishment unless it causes a bruise or a mark. However, once it has left a bruise or a mark is the defining moment of abuse and neglect. However, this is the case in several other state statutes and law and other ordinances and resolutions throughout the state. So if we are to update this, we have to update all other legislation that has the same criteria in order to have the effect that we want this bill to have. When abuse and neglect does occur, it is important that it is investigated in a timely manner and done by an impartial investigator. Of course, if someone is investigating themselves, they're going to try to cover it up and say it doesn't happen. Another thing for disability is that we often aren't taught how to protect ourselves when abuse and neglect does occur. We are not taught sexual education due to the myths of eugenics or the myth about asexuality. We are not taught about the basic element of consent.
Okay, Mr. Barber, I hate to cut you off, but we need to get to one other
Without
person.
consent, people won't know how to
protect
themselves.
Could you contact the sponsor of the bill with your issues? That would be very helpful. Appreciate it very much. Any questions for this gentleman? See, no, thank you very much for your time. Next, we'll take one more, and then we'll probably have to go on recess soon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Otto Fajan on behalf of Missouri NEA. We'd like to go on record in strong support of House Bill 2095. We appreciate Representative Kelly bringing this bill forward. Don't want to add too much to the testimony that's already been had. It's pretty emotional, and we just wanted to make sure that the committee realizes that we appreciate the leadership of the legislature in prior years, and make sure that folks understand, as of 2013, it's already a requirement that schools are providing annual training on reporting of neglect and abuse, and that it is a direct reporting mandate. So employees need to be annually trained and reminded when they have reason to believe that they have to directly report. There's no longer any kind of a designated reporter provision. So we want to just make sure you all knew that that was already part of the law. It's not clear that that's being done sufficiently. We have those kinds of concerns, along with just the general concern that there ought to be one consistent standard for the investigation of child abuse and neglect complaints. So for all those reasons, we strongly support House Bill 2095. We're glad to have any questions.
Thank you, Representative Nerman.
Just a comment. Thank you, Otto, for being here. You know, one of the things that you said there I thought was really interesting. I didn't know that I was a direct reporter, that I was responsible for hotlining until somebody one day, obviously a lot of times I would go to our counselor or school psychologist, and I remember she sat me down and she goes, Maggie, you need to call this number. Here's this piece of paper, and this is what you do. And so, this body, we often mandate different things, whether it's, I think of recently the dyslexia training, right, that annual training. I can't emphasize this enough. I'm not saying, I think school districts, most are, I think, are very well aware of this. But again, I guess just that absolute encouragement that this needs to be an annual reminder. It needs to be a cheat sheet that every teacher has next to their phone. This is what you do. This is what you are required to report. Because I think, quite frankly, as we often talk about, teachers are responsible for so much.
Right.
But that was what was so scary during COVID, is there were kiddos that I didn't have eyes on. And I couldn't connect with them, and I didn't know if they were okay, if they were getting enough food, right? So when that kid comes in the morning and they knew that I'd always have my bottom desk drawer, that I'd have, granola bars, that type of stuff, and they would say, hey, can I have that? And it's Monday morning, and I realized they didn't eat all weekend. Like, those are the things that we need to be stressing and supporting and putting whatever we can in terms of our power as a committee, as a General Assembly behind. So thank you for that reminder.
We appreciate that. We were working closely with Representative Hafner when that bill was done, and it has some safeguards to ensure that all employees have time and access to make those reports. Somebody covers the classroom, they have access to a phone. There's a written policy adopted by the school board, that there's a training program, that is provided annually to every staff member. That's in the law. That's been the law since 2013. We think it will help to enhance the implementation of that, perhaps, if we also then make sure that all investigations are done by the Children's Division.
Yep. Okay. Well, thank you. And I think it just reiterates the need, and I know Representative Kelly said this, to making sure that we're putting the resources also behind Children's Division, because quite frankly, we should be sending them more work. There's a lot out there, whether it's, and a lot of reasons why we should be hotlining kiddos, whether it's more families experiencing homelessness and realizing that kids aren't in a safe situation, whether it's all of these really severe neglect. And quite frankly, like I said before, it was me recognizing I need to hotline an administrator when I was at a school, because that was the right thing to do. So again, thank you for that. And Mr. Chair, thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else here to testify on this bill? Okay, that'll conclude the public hearing on House Bill 2095. We're going to go into recess and come back in hearing room 1 at 2 p.m. Okay, good afternoon. The Elementary and Secondary Education Committee will now resume, and we will now hear House Bill 1973, sponsored by Representative Gregory.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. I know we had the long hearing this morning, which was great, and I know that takes place sometimes. So thanks for coming back in this afternoon for this bill. So for the record, Curtis Gregory, District 51, so parts of Saline, Johnson, and Pettis County at the moment. So I want you to sit back for a little bit, and we're going to put on a little bit of an imagination hat. I've been thinking of the best way to present this, and this is, you'll get where I'm going. For all the years since I've been, that I was in school, and, all of you all probably went to school, the main way to get kids to school was to ride the school bus, or obviously hitch a ride with your mom or your friend's mom. But for the most part, relied on the school bus. And that's just the way it is. That's the way it has been. And so what we're looking to do with this bill is open up some flexibility on being able to get to kids in school. Because obviously with COVID, we've even realized the more importance of having kids in seat and learning. And my mind has evolved when looking at what we're trying to do here, and I see this fitting many different applications all across the state. It somewhat started in a discussion of focusing on kids, specifically in cities, just because those bus routes are a little more complicated and there's many more routes. But a kid that might stay in one house one night, with a friend the next night, with an aunt the next night, and the only day he's able to go to school or when he's at home because he knows where that bus stop is and that bus route is. So what this would do would be able to open up the definitions for certain companies to contract with school districts for transporting kids to school. And so they would say, hey, we know that, little Johnny doesn't have a solid home and where he's going to be at every night. And you all could be able to pick him up at the location where he's at every morning in order for him to get to school. And it's since evolved in my mind since I started thinking about this. Well, what about the rural school district, that's beating big buses up and down gravel roads? Obviously, transportation is a big cost. The school bus might be getting, 4 miles to the gallon. So the extra miles they drive, the more money going into transportation. What if this company could provide a cheaper alternative to where little Johnny that's 20 miles out of the way on this bus route is going to have to spend an hour and a half on the bus, wear and tear on the bus, and get him to school safely and cheaper? What about a school like where I went to high school, Santa Fe and Alma? Their VOTEC program is in Lexington, Missouri. What if they only have 4 or 5 kids in this VOTEC program and they're sending a big school bus to Lexington only to transport these 4 or 5 kids? This philosophy could work for that situation also. And so to walk through the mechanics of it, to be able to do this, we do have to go in and do a few things. Modifying the definition of a school bus as designed for carrying more than 10 passengers because, well, let's be frankly honest, a school bus, big yellow bus, the big yellow banana, however you want to phrase it, that's what we're talking about. And then we go in, and it would give the school districts have the authority to use motor vehicles other than school buses, since we've defined it, for the purpose of transporting these school children. And then we're going to let it fall and meet any other additional requirements of the school district, but would also exclude motor vehicles operating under the authority of the Department of Revenue, sections 387-400 and 387-440, the transportation networking companies. And motor vehicles other than school buses used to transport children says will not have more children than the manufacturer suggests. So it would be falling in under the same safety guidelines. I just truly feel like this is an out-of-the-box idea. It's a safe idea with these companies. It gives the district some local control to work with their transportation budget, because if they have a known route that costs them an exponential amount of dollars just because of 1 or 2 kids, then they'd be able to rein that back in. And transportation funding is something we always talk about year after year down here. And I think it could be a potential smarter way to spend those transportation dollars. And I know I have some witnesses behind me that will have a lot more expert answers than what I might have at this point, but I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Any questions? Representative Brown, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being patient with our group. Have you had any pushback on this from anybody?
I wouldn't say any real pushback. There's been some discussion on the defining of what a school bus actually is. But the way I understand it in the current definition, I could say that my F-350 could be potentially a school bus. And so that has been the main issue so far at this point. And we're open to finding some solutions to that. But we really like where we stand right now with the current language.
Okay, so no.
And to be clear, we're not trying to replace the school bus at all.
Right.
We're just trying to provide another option, another alternative. You step back and you look at a problem and you try and throw the same solution at that problem every single year, and you're not getting anywhere. And so this is just meant to be a supplemental alternative to help out in many other categories as well.
So, if I'm hearing you right, you're trying to expand the definition of a school bus, or do you want to delineate these so many type of vehicles can transport children under the name of a school bus?
It would be, like I said, defining it to a vehicle that carries 10 passengers or more. So then in my mind, that would put it as more of the actual like physical bus. When you see the yellow bus going down the road, like, okay, that's designed to carry 10 or more people. And then with the other language would open it up for the districts to contract with a transportation company at that point that might use a Ford Explorer or a Dodge Caravan, a minivan. Yeah.
Church type bus. Okay. So, do you see any issues with like how far some of these other vehicles might have to drive? Will that be a concern for you at all? So let me give you an example. I had a situation where I was working with some folks who needed to transport a kid from Wentzville to Troy because of a family situation, exactly the kind of thing that you're talking about. Families in transition, for one reason or another. Will there be any language or requirements that says they can only go so far in your bill? I'm not talking about contractually, because I think locally those folks can work out their own contracts. I'm sure you would agree with that. So nothing in the bill that would say you can only drive so far under this definition.
Not to my knowledge.
Get in here,
No,
but-
no, not to my knowledge, no. And I think you mentioned the best thing there. Let's let the local districts decide, how they're going to contract, where they can go at that point.
So again, we're modifying the definition and giving people permission.
Yes.
Okay, so just so you understand where I'm coming from with that, in less than 24 hours, I've heard a bill in another committee where we're just giving people permission to do what they need to do. So it's just a little odd to me, but I don't have an issue with your bill, but I just needed those answered publicly.
Yes, and like we're not just opening up to where just anybody can do it.
Okay.
The district would then still get to set the requirements. Like they could set forth as stringent a requirement as what they would want at that point. Because obviously I want to keep the kids safe. I'm not trying to do anything that's going to make kids less safe. I'm just opening up other options that might be more economically feasible.
So a typical FRP, I think they're called FRPs, where they put them out to contract the bid that suits all of the requirements laid out by the school district, that type of thing. Is that what you're thinking?
I could see it working somewhat like that.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Hafner.
To inquire, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Just a couple of comments. Gentlemen, appreciate what you're doing here. I see this as innovation, and you're doing it at the local level. So you're giving the opportunity for those local school districts to meet their needs and to maximize their opportunities based upon cost. So I like what you're doing here. I just had just one quick comment because you mentioned this, but I want everybody in the committee, sometimes we don't understand what is going on in some of these rural communities. Prior to being a legislature, I traveled not only to your old school district, but also to the chairman's, and would spend 2 or 3 days there and then talk with the student body. And I was appalled at the number of kids that were homeless. And they were transitory almost on a nightly basis. But this provides some flexibility to those individual school districts in order to meet those kids' needs. And we got to do a better job of meeting those kids' needs because it's a changing demographic. And so I appreciate you bringing this forward, and I appreciate the discussions.
Well, to speak to that further, we know what education can do for folks. I've heard bills already. We're just getting an actual high school diploma generally has better outcomes as far as employment, getting benefits at your job, the whole 9 yards. And so I think the more solid of a foundation we can give a kid from kindergarten on, is just going to lead to better outcomes, in everyday life, everyday society, and grow from there. But, kind of in closing, one of the companies that does offer this type of service. You know, for examples where they're already operating at, I'd say the big one is Texas, Wisconsin, Virginia, Maryland, Colorado, Arizona, Washington, Nevada, California. And so they're making it work there. I don't see any reason why we can't make this work in Missouri.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the representative? Thank you very much. And we're going to take testimony now. We're going to try and limit each witness to 2 minutes. So the first witness in support of the bill, and I apologize to everybody that's been waiting, you know, through the morning hearing and now, but appreciate everybody's patience.
No, thank you. We had the pleasure of sitting in this morning, and I know how challenging your jobs are, so I appreciate the attention this afternoon. My name is Trish Donahue. I am Vice President of Legal and Policy at a company called Hop Skip Drive. We are a transportation network company designed specifically for kids. And so we are actually the brainchild of 3 working moms who came together and said, I am dying, I'm working, I can't get Jackson to karate at 3 p.m. and keep my job. And so they designed a solution for working parents with the North Star being the question, what would it take for me to put my own child into a Hop Skip Drive ride? That was back in 2014. We launched in California, and since that time we have grown into 9 states and growing. We're actually launching 2 more this month. We have shifted actually from a consumer-facing business to mostly serving school districts and county foster agencies. Right after launching in California, we had Los Angeles County's foster agency reach out to us because, as you can imagine, children in foster care may be traveling across the city or across district boundaries to get to school, and their placements can change very frequently. The average child experiencing homelessness moves at least 3 times throughout the school year. It's nearly impossible when a child moves on Tuesday night for a school district bus to be rerouted in time for that child to get back to school on Wednesday. And so that's where small vehicle transportation comes into play. Some safety features, I know that's at the top of everyone's mind. We have a 15-point care driver certification process. We call our drivers care drivers because they have at least 5 years of prior caregiving experience. I'm the mom of a 6-month-old baby. I actually would not qualify to drive on the platform yet myself because I don't have those 5 years in place. We also do fingerprint-based background checks, child abuse and neglect searches, motor vehicle history reports, annual vehicle inspections. Care drivers have to be at least 23 years of age or older, and we hold them to the same background check requirements that teachers are held to because we really do consider this child care on wheels. And then last safety feature I want to mention, so we use the technology to our advantage. Every driver books rides through an application, and that application uses telematics to detect driving patterns in real time. So we know if a driver is speeding, if they are, rapid acceleration, tight turning, hard braking. We have on-time collision detection. And then we also use that application to facilitate GPS monitoring. So if I'm a school, the school personnel can monitor a ride in real time. The parent can monitor a ride in real time. And then also we are monitoring the ride in real time at Hop Skip Drive. So I will wrap up there. We are supporting this bill 1973. We believe that delineating the requirements for school buses from small vehicle requirements simply makes sense and helps to ensure that we can operate here and provide the solution to Missouri families and get drivers on the road faster.
Do you have onboard cameras on the vehicles?
We use the Safe Ride support in lieu of onboard cameras currently. As you can imagine, it's one of those things where we have plenty of people opposing cameras on board and plenty of people in support of cameras on board. So we have found that watching the rides in real time is an adequate supplement to cameras.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for this witness? Appreciate it very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here in opposition to this bill? Anyone for informational purposes only? Next witness in support of the bill.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Stacy Priest, I'm representing Aligned. Aligned is an organization of business leaders that supports educational opportunities for students so that they are well prepared for anything that comes after they graduate from high school. And we've talked about a lot of the details of the bills already, but I'll give you an example of how this would apply to students that we support and experiences that we support. We could also be thinking about this in terms of off-site learning experiences, work-based learning. So if we had 5 students who are going to work-based learning experiences in 5 different places, and we have to put all 5 of them on the same yellow school bus, or even worse, each one on its own individual yellow school bus, that just isn't efficient. It isn't a good use of resources. So having all these transportation vehicles defined the same way really does place some limitations on schools. We've covered the safety, background checks, that there are still, all of that stuff is still in place. So with that, Aligned is happy to support House Bill 1973.
Thank you. Any questions for this lady? Appreciate it. Next witness in support.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Craig Stevenson with Kids Win Missouri. Just wanted to go on record in support of the legislation as well. We think this is a really good idea. It provides additional flexibility. As a foster parent, just the practicality of something like this when, and I think we should do this more often as a state, but when I live outside of Columbia, so my local school district is not Columbia, but if I were to have a child who has their previous residency in Columbia, and it's best that that child stay in the Columbia School District, the transportation needs to be provided for, and this is an opportunity where a school district could contract with an agency like this to provide that service in a safe manner and not have to bring a bus driver back to do that service or use their buses to do so. We think this is good for kids in foster care, good for our youth experiencing homelessness. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for this gentleman? Nope. Thank you. Anyone else here to testify in support of the bill? In opposition? Informational purposes only. Maybe we should have done this before the other bill. So, thank you for your patience again. That'll conclude the hearing on House Bill 1973. We will now go to Representative Smith. He's on the way in. And we'll do House Bill 2010 first.
Good. Travis Smith, Representative 155. I'm represent Ozark County, Douglas County, Taney County, and got to know the Mode people last year. 2 ladies came in my office, and after about 3 minutes of talking about something, I said, "You got to stop, because I have no idea what you're talking about." And they said, "What we came to you and just did was, this is how certain parents feel sometimes when they get their children's IEP." And I said, "Whatever I can do to help you." And so I have been dedicated to Mode. I told them I would carry this bill, and I'm happy to do it, especially on the due process. I am not an expert on education. My background's in economic development, so I think there's some people today who would testify who's going to know a lot more than I do, but I do respect what Mode's trying to do from the stories I've heard in this building. Thank you.
And this was on House Bill 2010?
I'm sorry, yeah, 2010, that was the due process, sir.
Okay. Anyone have any questions for the representative? Yep. All right. Representative Brown.
Thank you. How are you today?
Good morning, afternoon.
Yeah. I'm a little confused. Both of my children have IEPs.
Yes, ma'am.
And it says that the burden of proof and the burden of production shall be on the school district regarding any matter related to identification, blah, blah, blah. What does that look like? Are you going to want me to ask somebody else?
Well, basically, and I appreciate that. Well, the way it was presented to me right now was the due process is on the parents, and there's only a certain amount of time that they have to respond to. And a lot of parents, especially first-time IEPs, are not in the situation where they know what's going on. So the idea with that was the school deals with this all the time, and so it's on the school to work with the parents. And from my understanding, talking to other superintendents and principals, there is a process of which they work. But the mode people are going to be able to explain that much better than I can.
Okay, I guess in my head right now, just so you know where I'm coming from, is that all of this burden of proof is already on the school district, but I'm seeing lots of heads, so I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you. I appreciate
and I'm
that.
gonna hope they come up, and I'm going to listen to what they have to say.
Thank you. Because like the people behind me do have stories, and they've been experienced with, they have it too. I was very blessed that I did not have to be in this situation, but I really understand, especially from some of the testimony I heard earlier today, that parents sometimes have a problem with the school districts.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Ma'am.
Representative Durnburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To inquire. So, good afternoon, Representative Smith.
Good afternoon.
I also was beyond impressed with the folks with Mode that came before us last year, and I continue to learn. I should say learn from them, quite honestly. I'd like to say learn with them, but I think sometimes that they are by far the experts. And what I want to say with this is the following. I appreciate anything that will increase not just transparency, but also accountability in this process. As an educator with essentially a lot of masters and multiple certifications and endorsements through DESE, as well as being a mom to 3 kids, when I came to the place of having to explore gifted testing and an IEP and a 504, even with 13 years as an educator, I found this system so complex and so convoluted that I thought to myself, how in the world can somebody navigate this that doesn't have my experience? And I'm being sincere in saying that. I mean, there was so much. So I thank you for all of this, for both pieces of legislation here. And this is the type of stuff that I like us to work on to see what we can do, whether it's cleaning something up in statute or recognizing that we do have LEAs that do this quite well and others that don't. And so recognizing where we have some opportunities for growth, but also wanting to say, because I think it's pertinent to the broader conversation, is that these are the type of policies that I would like to see every LEA express through explicit parents and guardians Bill of Rights. So everybody is really aware of how that policy, of how the procedure should unfold. So I just want to thank you for being the good guy in this and carrying something.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of this building is to present ideas.
Yep.
You know, it's strange to me when I have someone come up and said, hey, I've got to be against you today. It's not a for or against thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a learning process. And that's what we're here to do, is learn about some of these things too. And the Mode people are very passionate, and I respect people who are passionate about what they do. And those are the kind of people I want to serve.
I tend to be one of those people,
Yes.
Representative. But what I'm going to say is, and I know we talked about this offline a little bit, but I understand, and as every good policy, I think that we create, it shouldn't be created in an echo chamber, right? We need to hear pushback if there are issues, or there's, if you've gotten feedback from certain districts and saying, wait, this isn't right, or whatever it may be. I think no matter where we come out of this, is that we're going to create better policy and better statutes. So with that being said, I look forward to hearing from the eager folks behind you.
I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions for the representative? Thank you very much.
Thank you,
We'll
sir.
be with you here shortly.
Yes, sir.
First person in support. Is there anyone here in opposition to this bill for informational purposes? Okay, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Robin Shelp with Missouri Disability Empowerment, and I enjoy learning with you because I think this is such a learning curve for all of us. And I do want to say, last year we did seclusion restraint. It was good because we all sat down at the table and we came up with good language. And we appreciate that sentiment, that we want this to be good too. I want to go over it a little bit though. First, thank you for taking the time to hear House Bill 2010. Currently, federal law, the IDEA, requires that schools provide students a free, appropriate public education, FAPE. Parents do not have to apply for these services. It is the responsibility of the schools to identify, locate, and evaluate students. Once students are identified as having a disability, schools must provide a free, appropriate public education. IEPs are developed which outline how the school will provide an appropriate education as required under the IDEA. When parents do not think the school is providing an appropriate education, they may choose to file due process. And sometimes filing due process is the only option parents have to ensure that their students' educational needs are met. Currently, parents have the burden of proving that the school is not providing an appropriate education in due process. It is really hard to prove a negative. Parents have no right to interview teachers and other school professionals in advance. It is difficult for parents to get appropriate records and documents to prove their case. 9 states and Washington, D.C. have passed laws which require schools, districts to bear the burden of proof in due process cases. Indiana is currently working on a bill similar to this one. This idea that schools should bear the burden of proof is spreading. School systems have full access to records, teachers, educational experts, and therapists. Federal law places the obligation on school districts to provide an appropriate education to students with disabilities. When there's a disagreement, parents should not have to prove that the school district is not providing an appropriate education required by law. School districts should be required to prove the effectiveness of their actions. Thank you.
Thank you for keeping it a little over 2 minutes. I got a message from a guy named Alan, said you were out of time. Anyway,
He wants me to go home and pick up the kid, but it's too late for that.
that's her husband.
Just keep it going so he has to do bath time, right?
All right. Any questions for this witness? Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi again.
Hey.
Okay. So we have, I'm just zipping through the bill while you were talking.
Okay. And I am going to just, full disclosure, we have an expert about due process. I've never gone through a due process hearing. My son's IEP team has been amazing, and we've worked it out before we had to get to that point. So if it's really like in the weeds of due process,
it's not.
I'm going to punt.
Okay.
Okay.
That's all right. So what really stuck in my head when you said it was, it's impossible to prove a negative.
It's hard.
I mean, it is hard. It's probably
Yeah.
the hardest thing that someone would have to do. I don't typically, these conversations today have like built up a lot of stuff from my personal responses, because I remember walking out of an IEP saying, you're not supposed to shove a kid into a program that it exists. You're supposed to create a program for the kid.
Right. And okay, so here's the funny thing. That's coming up on 2011.
Okay.
The next bill, we did these backwards. We should have done the first one and then gone into the due process. This is like after that, this is what happens.
So I just want to be clear. So we're not meeting a kid's needs based on the minutes, based on the IEP that everyone signed off on.
Right.
But in this bill, it says that there's like a box that says do not consent. Are you familiar with that part of this bill?
The what?
That's the next one. Oh, that is the next one.
Yeah, the parental consent bill.
Okay.
Again.
All right, so you want to put the burden of proof on the school to prove what they're doing.
Right.
Which should be available via lesson plans, work samples.
Yeah, data with the special, when it comes to an IEP, you have to collect data on all the goals. You should be able to prove that data.
Right.
With the data.
And right now in the due process that we have, it's actually the parent who has to prove that they didn't do it instead of the school district.
It's whoever files.
Have the data.
Right, whoever files due process. So when the parent's frustrated because the school is stopping a service or forcing a child into a placement they don't like, they have to file due process. And we're going to get into this in the next bill, but if you don't like that IEP and you leave that room and you don't sign it, it still goes into effect. And if it's one of those, if the change is drastic, we're going to send the kid over to High Roads, and you're like, we're not doing that. The only option you have to stop them from sending your child to High Roads is to file due process. And we're saying when that parent files due process, the school better prove that High Roads is the best placement. Don't make me prove to you that this is the best placement, which you should have been doing the right things and you weren't doing the right things. That's really hard, but that's what the expectation is right now.
So okay, I got that part. So if the school district might be able to file due process?
I think there are situations, and Laura can probably speak better to when the school district would file due process. Right now, it's probably pretty stinking rare because they have so much of the power right now in the IEP process.
Okay.
And we're not trying to give all the power to the parents. We are trying to create this middle ground where we are collaborative and we work together.
Okay. I'm going to stop asking you questions because I have lots of questions for the folks who are nodding. So.
It's going to be, yeah. We good?
Representative Durburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to just share one of the concerns, and I believe, and I was really grateful for you all reaching out ahead of time and sharing some of this with me. And one of the things that I think I expressed at that time and continued to have the concern is about the fiscal impact. And with saying that, just because it has a physical impact doesn't mean that it's not the right thing to do. Okay, so I want to make sure that that's abundantly clear. But one of the things I am also cognizant of is when I look at the information that Oversight has handed us here with the fiscal note, is we know that this is going to be, with that burden of proof being on the school district, that it's going to have a fiscal impact. And so I just want to make sure, and this is just really just a comment, that we look into this a little bit more, that we get some more information from our school districts and see if we need to attach some funding for this one way or another through the budget process. Obviously, that's
So,
a separate
and can I
conversation,
speak to
but-
that?
Sure. Yeah. Would you?
Yeah, well, and I think there's probably someone who can speak better to that. But I am a little, I have yet to see the fiscal note. I forgot to
Can I
look at
tell
that.
you- Yeah, can I tell you what it says?
Yeah, I'd
It's
love to know.
Essentially, like one of our, and that's the goal, is you get a wide range of different organizations that
Sure.
would be impacted by this. So, for example, Gordon Parks Elementary, it's a charter school, assumes there's a proposal will have a fiscal impact. Taneyville R2 considers this to have a very large fiscal impact on the school districts because of those increased attorney fees, increased costs for special education coordination. So, again, there
Right.
is
So
gonna
I
be-
would be questioning why they think lots of parents are going to file due process. That's concerning. And the reality is parents can file due process right now. And a parent isn't going to want to file due process just because the burden of proof is on the school. They still would have to hire an attorney, go through the thing. It's a headache. We don't want that. The schools already have to pay the lawyers for due process that are going on when they're not doing what they should be doing.
Okay.
So I'm
and maybe
not,
I'll
I'm,
stop there. Maybe that's just one of those things I need to do my own research.
Maybe.
and reach
I'm
out to
just
the
a little
school
concerned when
district.
and then when I hear things like, well, it's going to cost us more than in special ed. Why? Because we're going to demand that you do what the law says?
And again, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I
right,
bristle a
but I
little
just-
because I know what due process is costing our parents
Sure.
to have to dig through all the paperwork. And so it's hard. And as on the parent side, it's like, okay, my tax dollars are going to represent someone who fights against me and I have to pay my own. It's frustrating.
Well, again, I'll
Yeah.
continue those conversations offline, but I did want to bring that up. I know that I
That's
shared those
really
concerns
good, though,
ahead of
for
time.
us to look into.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Appreciate it.
I
Thank you,
want
Mr.
to
Chair.
just throw out one comment, and I don't know if you remember or not, when we had our first, this is unrelated to this bill, but talking about cost, when we had our first meeting about the recording in the Columbia Public School Board office,
Yeah.
what came up?
Yeah, so when
They were talking about
CPS was
cost.
told we wanted to record, and they said, well, to record, it's going to cost $800,000 a year for us to store the data. I think your point is maybe those are slightly inflated. I don't know what their numbers are and what they're basing it on. But yeah, I really don't know. But I would question that.
Right. You kind of hit at my my point. Sometimes, in my opinion, again, this is just my opinion. I feel that the fiscal notes on a lot of legislation are inflated to create a stigma that the legislation is no good in the eyes of people that might have to do a little work to honor something that is passed. So that's just a point I make. I might not be right, but that's my impression.
And, this isn't new. The states that are doing this have been doing it for many years, so it may even be something to look into. What has it done to other states with their fiscal costs?
Right. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Next person in support of the bill. And
Just trying to turn it off.
Okay.
Tell me who you are. My name is Russell. I am 8 years old. I live in Kansas City, Missouri. I have white hair And the reason is because I have albinism. Because of my albinism, I am legally blind. It's from the parents and is ultimately given to the kid. When I was finishing preschool, my teachers thought I needed to learn Braille. The teacher who tested me from my school district did not think I needed it. I was tested by 2 other teachers of the visually impaired TVIs who also thought I needed to learn Braille. But even with 3 different teachers who thought I needed it, we still didn't agree with the school. Then I got a lawyer to help me. Once my lawyer and the school's lawyer came to my meetings, we finally agreed that I should learn Braille. We had 3 experts who said I needed it, and the law in Missouri says blind kids should learn Braille unless the school can show that they don't need it. But if we had not been able to agree and my lawyer had to file a complaint, it would be my job to prove that I wasn't getting what I needed. It's the school's job to set every kid up for success, so it seems only fair that they should have to show that they are doing what they should.
Ask them if they have any questions for you.
Do you guys have any questions for us?
You did a good job, Russell. Representative Nerburn.
Just to quickly comment, Mr. Chair. Russell, you're awesome. Thanks for coming today. And your bravery is just so inspiring. So you're a cool kid.
Ah, that's so nice.
Well, and your shirt, I tell you what, if we could just print that everywhere. You speak that in your actions today and what you're doing. So thanks, buddy.
Bye.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, let's
Next.
go.
Good afternoon. I'm Julia Cheney Fawn. I drove up from Macon today. I am a parent of 2 children on the autism spectrum, and I bought a picture. I know I'm in support generally of both 2010 and 2011. And the reason why I'm hoping there is substantial support for these bills this year is because oftentimes schools, there's a lot of schools where there are not appropriate placements for children. This is a picture of my 2 children, Charlotte and Isaac, at an adapted gymnastics class where they have the ability to be successful because they have the appropriate supports and accommodations. This gymnastics program is a wonderful program where they can learn one-on-one. This is why I believe it's so important for children to be in an appropriate placement, and that also goes hand in hand with having the ability to shift the burden for due process hearings onto the school. My son Isaac is autistic, and he's very limited verbal. So traditional school has been very difficult for him. At this time, he is in an alternative placement. But I will say this, as an attorney and a parent who's worked with special needs children and adults for over 10 years, there are so many placements out there that there is no way I would allow my son to go to. And hearing testimony earlier this morning, it sounds like there's several other placements I would not feel comfortable sending my son to as well. If a parent has to file a due process complaint, it's very expensive and burdensome. It seems like we've got a system set up now where the cards are stacked against the parents, especially the parents of disabled children. I have the ability to choose my child's doctors and choose my child's therapists. So I believe parents should have the final say in placement for into 11, and I also believe that it's appropriate to move forward with 210 on the burden of proof as well. What happens for my son Isaac when he's in an appropriate placement? He will have an adapted, age-appropriate curriculum where he learns to communicate. Isaac has a communication device. I have a more current picture of him, and since we reside up in Macon, this is at the Callio Christmas lights, if any of you guys have ever been up there. Isaac has the ability to be successful. Isaac has the ability to communicate. Isaac has the ability to be happy. But that needs to happen in an appropriate placement. My son has the ability to read words and communicate, but school is very difficult for nonverbal people. One of my good friends has cerebral palsy, and she tells people constantly when she first meets them, I'm not stupid, but she does speak slightly different because of her developmental disability. Children with language disorders are not stupid. We should never underestimate a child's potential. I believe an appropriate placement leads to appropriate IEPs to match the ability of children. I work with clients all over Northeast Missouri. So when I speak about these children, these are children in my neighborhood. These are children who have IEPs all over the state of Missouri. And I'll give you one example of my friend Jessica, who's a lifelong resident of the state of Missouri, who's had much success in schools, because I know we've heard a lot of concerns today, but there are success stories. And as I've spoken with parents about concerns over services, especially services for kids in rural areas, there are success stories. But she was just as horrified to understand going through the IEP laws and going through the Missouri laws that, you know, she didn't have the final say in consent. And if she needed to file a due process hearing, that she had the burden of proof. So I will show you Jessica's story today. Her son DJ was nonverbal until he was age 6, but he was never separated out. He also had speech apraxia and autism. Because he was placed in a general education classroom with an appropriate IEP, he is now speaking and has done amazingly well in school. In addition, she also had a second child, Hunter, who has also been in general regular education most of his life. He has been successful because he had a good IEP with a BIP, which is a behavioral improvement plan. And at this point, now that he's in high school, he doesn't even need an IEP. So Jessica is a firm believer in appropriate placement where children receive the appropriate supports. And you know, this is a challenge. Jessica lives in Nixa, and Nixa is a very large area and a very large school district compared to what most of us have in northeastern Missouri. And I know it's difficult, so we need more services. We need more staff. We need better staffing ratios. And that's my concern as well about placements and the burden of proof in these IEP laws. If my son is in an appropriate school, the staff are trained and the staffing ratios are appropriate. Many Missouri placements for disabled children are understaffed and do not have staff that are properly trained. And as we've heard today, and as I've heard for many years, really bad things happen to disabled children. But today, I am requesting and hoping you support Bill 210 and 211 because my son will have continued better outcomes as he grows. He will have a continued better opportunities if he continues to be in an appropriate placement. He will have better opportunities, as will the friends of my children in these rural areas who have opportunities to have therapy, have additional paras, have special education teachers, because I will say we talk a lot about the urban areas in Boone County, but we need more services in these rural counties. It's hard to attract speech therapists. It's hard to get autism therapy. Anyone in my county has to drive an hour south or an hour north for any autism therapy. And some parents will do it, but a lot of parents don't have those opportunities to travel. So I appreciate your support today. I hope you continue to protect and serve our most disabled children, our most vulnerable population, and I appreciate your support for these bills today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for this witness? Okay, appreciate it. Thanks. Next witness in support. And if we could try and be as brief as possible, but go ahead, ma'am.
Yes. My name is Brianna, and I am going to keep this brief because I think a lot of people have already touched on a lot of what I was going to say. I am also in the camp that it feels like we're doing these in reverse. So if anything I say is unclear, just feel free to ask. The problems that I see are that House Bill 11 really addresses the problem that schools really do have a frightening amount of unilateral authority over children and their families when there's an IEP in play. And the problem that House Bill 2010 solves is that when schools exert too much of that power, it's on them to prove that they're using it responsibly.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Are you Brianna Conley?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, and I'm the Public Policy and Youth Services Manager at Paraquad. I tried to keep it brief, and I think I forgot to introduce myself. Paraquad is one of the largest centers for independent living in the country, and we're unique because more than 50% of our board and staff are people with disabilities. So these are issues that we and the people we serve live day to day. Topics covered in an IEP cover everything from accommodations to post-high school transition plans. These are things that impact a child's entire life. When there's a disagreement, as many people have said, the due process complaint is the only recourse. Here in Missouri, due process hearings look and feel a lot like trials. Both the districts and their parents present their case. Both the districts and the parents present their case to an impartial, trained hearing officer in a formal legal setting using witnesses, testimony, documents, and legal arguments. Because this is a legal proceeding, both the district and the parents can have legal counsel. Unfortunately, while districts almost always have this representation, there are very few lawyers in the state of Missouri who will represent families in due process hearings, and the ones who do are out of financial reach for many parents of children with disabilities. The inability to secure legal representation is only one of the many hurdles faced by parents in these situations. Unlike civil and some criminal cases, there's no pretrial discovery period where you would have the ability to interview teachers in advance, as districts do. Parents also lack access to records and the advice of child development, education, and legal experts. Despite all of this, Missouri law places the burden of proof and production on parents, not on the districts. So you have all of this disadvantage in information and resources, and then you walk into a legal situation where you have to present a legal case, probably without representation, and it's on you, again, to prove that negative. It's a very time-consuming process, and it's not an adequate solution for a lot of families. No harm would come to a district from requiring them to bear the burden. But doing so would really protect parents, children, and families. The school district, as Robin said, is already required to support and justify its proposals in meetings with parents. So to expand that to a neutral fact finder, they should be able to present all of that same data that they have at the ready to convince parents. And that is just a condensed version because there are a lot of experts in this room who have touched on all of this.
Okay, thank you so much. Any questions for this lady, Representative Brown?
How are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm learning a lot on this one. So, how much does it cost? I mean, what would be an average cost for a parent to go through a due process?
So, it's my understanding that there are people in the room who have done this, and they may be able to answer that question. I will be honest with you, when I prepared this statement, I tried to research that. I tried to find lawyers, I tried to find average costs, I tried to find data because I'm a real data numbers person, and I couldn't. I've heard rumors that there is only 1 or 2 lawyers in the state that will even accept these cases. I've heard rumors that if you're willing to pay enough, you can find others. I couldn't find that information quickly and easily. I will keep looking and get back to you, though.
Are any of you ladies going to testify? I have that answer. Okay, great.
She has that answer.
Okay, I will
I'm going to
wait.
get out of the seat and let her talk to you.
Thank you.
Okay, nobody else. Next in support.
So my name is Luke Barber, and I'm from the Des Peres 63131 zip code. Currently, the burden of proof is used in the courts and the legal system. It states who must prove that the law is followed or not. Currently, the level for burden of proof is the preponderance of evidence, which states that 50% of the time, 51% or more of the time, that thing is happening. Currently, the burden of proof is on families, parents, and adult students or adult with disabilities, 18 plus. Something people don't know about school-age kids is that students with disabilities can actually is still in high school from 18 to 21. So at that point, they're at the age of majority, so the burden shifts to them. And another thing is that given that school districts are often funded by the state, they technically would be state entities. Currently, in any other legal setting, with the exception of education, whenever a state entity is sued, the state entity has the burden of proof. Education is the one exception to this rule. Therefore, the burden of proof should lie with school districts, as they have to prove that they are following all the applicable laws, such as the ADA, IDA, 504, Rehab Act, and other laws that are applicable to them at the time the students are receiving services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Any questions for this gentleman? Thank you. Next witness in support.
Hello, my name is Dr. Laura Wakefield, and I am from Columbia and Boone County. I'm a private practice advocate for children with disabilities. I have over 27 years of experience working with individualized education programs, IEPs. I've attended over 3,000 IEP meetings in my lifetime. I have a national consulting business where I assist families all over the nation navigate the confusing process of special education. The concentration of my clients is in Missouri. I've worked with clients in Lee Summit, Blue Springs, Odessa, Raymore, Pattonville, Hazelwood, Francis Howell, Mexico, Scotland County, Hickman Mills, Baldwin, Wentzville, Clayton, Springfield, Moberly, Madison, Centralia, Ashland, Harrisburg, Hallsville, and Columbia, just to name a few. I'm in support of House Bill 2010, which would restore the burden of proof and the burden of production in special education due process hearings back onto the school districts. So they must prove they have provided FAPE to children with disabilities. Remember, the special education law is the only parentally enforced law on the books. The Supreme Court case of Schaefer versus Wheat in 2005 is the decision that placed the burden of proof in due process hearings on the party challenging the IEP. And this is what they added in their decision, unless a state law or regulation states otherwise. And so that's why we need this state law in Missouri. And as Robin Schelt mentioned, the other states, the other 9 states that have shifted to this, that is the reason why they're doing that. Prior to 2005, it was on the schools, but after that case. So that's why there has to be state laws to change that. Now, the party who usually brings a due process case 99% of the time is the parent. There is only a very narrow set of circumstances in which a school can bring the due process. So parents have far fewer resources and are less able to navigate the special education hearing maze than school districts. It's therefore appropriate that school districts in Missouri bear the burden of proof. There are 4 main reasons to consider why it's appropriate for it to be shifted back to the schools. School districts have overwhelming advantages over parents. They usually employ a team of attorneys with the parents' taxpayer dollars, and the parents are literally paying taxes to these attorneys, so they should be able to prove to the parents that the school has delivered FAPE. School district attorneys have easy access to all the school staff to testify as witnesses at hearings, in addition to other paid experts. School district attorneys also have access to all the data, whereas parents are often blocked from obtaining records and don't even know what to ask for in most cases. Number 3, parents are often unable to access or afford attorneys to represent them in the state of Missouri. Good luck finding one. They have to take out loans or represent themselves pro se because of the enormous costs that the current burden of proof situation places on the parents. This results in parents foregoing due process altogether, and this results in situations in some school districts where parents have to leave their children in abusive, neglectful, and the segregated settings. And finally, number 4, most parents of children with disabilities live in poverty or have difficult financial circumstances. It's extremely expensive to raise a child with a disability. And also, many parents cannot work outside of the home because of the intensive needs required for their child. Research by Wegner et al. In 2003 has shown that parents of children with disabilities are less well educated than parents of children in the general population. This is usually due to the fact that they cannot afford to continue their education paths after their child with a disability is born. This results in parents who will not have the skill sets to represent themselves or have the money to hire an attorney. The deck is stacked against parents of children with disabilities in every way. In closing, placing the burden of proof back on school districts is important to level the playing field for parents and children in Missouri. This bill would help ensure that Missouri takes a strong stand for parents to enforce the law that protects the rights of children with disabilities in our state to access their education.
Thank you, Dr. Wakefield. Representative Brown.
So the $64 million question, how much is it?
Okay, so this is the book I wrote, and in my research, here is what I found. So according to the American Association of Superintendents, they did some research in 2016, and so these are going to be national averages that I'm going to report to you.
Okay.
So the average legal fees for a district involved in a due process hearing were $10,512. When districts were ordered to compensate parents for their attorney's fees, because that is one of the things, if the parent wins, then the school district does have to pay for the attorney fees. So when that happens, that's an added $19,000 for the parents' attorney fees. So now you're looking at around $30,000 for the school district. The costs associated with the verdict of a due process hearing averaged around $15,000. So that would be things where districts are having to pay for maybe compensatory services that were owed or a separate private educational setting tuition. So those might be why those costs are around that number. For districts that chose to settle with the parents, because a lot of the cases end up in a settlement, the settlement costs averaged around $23,000. And so all of that information is from AASA's executive summary from April 2016, and I can send that information to you.
We are struggling for time, of course, today. Would you be willing to sit down with me?
Yes.
Yes. This hearing and just walk me through some of these numbers. I'm intrigued to hear about why people would settle. So, and then of private services, I'm guessing that would be in areas where there just are no services available for the public school.
That can be one of the reasons. Another reason for settlement that I haven't even gotten into is one of the biggest costs that we haven't discussed is emotional capital. This is an exhausting process for a parent, especially when the burden of proof is on them. And the school district attorneys engage in a lot of bullying tactics. And it's just very contentious and difficult. And even if you quote win and you have to go through this hearing, you're having to hear a lot of difficult things about your child, and the attorneys are in those situations to win it. And so some of the things that they're going to say in that hearing are very difficult. And they're maybe not true, but it's because they're trying to win a case. And so for a parent to sit through that for 2 days and hear that, the emotional part of that is just devastating. And so sometimes parents will go ahead and settle so that they don't have to go through that process, especially if they can maybe get at least a few things that they were trying for.
Okay. I think we have a lot to talk about. I don't want to.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Any other questions?
Okay, any other questions? Thank you so much. Next, witness in support. And as Representative Brown said, we do have 2 more bills that I hate to rush people, but if you could be brief as possible,
Don't
thank
worry,
you.
I'll be fast because I'm terrified. So.
Oh, you're doing fine. So,
my name is Erin Keith. I live in Columbia. I'm a parent of 3, one who uses special education services. I support House Bill 2010, shifting the burden of proof to schools. We have unfortunately needed to go through this process very recently. We had no choice but to file due process. 3 days before summer break, the school said my son could not return to the public school. That was in June. Throughout the summer, we were asked by the school's attorneys to produce 68 categories of documents, many of which the school already had access to. In fact, in some cases, we had asked for a copy of these items months before, like during the school year, but our request had been ignored despite these things being part of our son's educational record. In December, we signed an agreement, settled. By then, it had cost our family $8,400, but the monetary total was nothing compared to the emotional cost and time investment. That's huge. It's now February, and we're still trying to get everything finalized from the case, so the monetary cost continues to rise, as the district will only communicate through lawyers. No family should have to go through this to keep their child out of a segregated school. I urge you to support Missouri families by requiring school districts to bear the burden of proof. Families of children with disabilities are bearing enough.
and is this, you said you lived in Boone County, is that,
Columbia.
you're dealing with CPS?
Yes.
Thank you. Any questions for this lady? I appreciate your patience, and thank you much. You did just fine. Yeah. Anyway, we're just, next witness in support. Okay. Okay, we cannot have props allowed, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Do I need to move it back over there?
Yeah, good. It's, yeah.
Thanks, girl. Again, my name is Crystal Blauvelt. I spoke with you earlier this morning. I am a mom of a child in Columbia Public Schools. My husband, Andrew, and I have 2 children in the district. We have one that has a phenomenal experience. I have nothing bad to say, if I might be very honest. Neurotypical, 0 issues. We have a son who is 11 years old, who, as we spoke about earlier, struggles with autism, amongst other diagnoses. As you can see, even though I'm not allowed to bring it up here, I brought this suitcase with me here today. It weighs 37 pounds. This suitcase contains everything that my lawyer just copied so that we could pursue due process. That's what it costs me. 2 5-inch ring binders that are between $15 and $25 a piece. Another 3-inch ring binder to take with me to every IEP meeting. A calendar, portfolio, business cards for my attorneys. All of the things are in there, including loose documents that I have not found the time to file. So at home, I have a 2-drawer filing cabinet that houses the record from Iowa in addition to this bag. So In addition to every negotiated copy of our son's individual education program and behavioral intervention plan from this year is in that bag. That's 1 year of education from my son. 1 year. And I have to present all of it in order to go to due process against CPS for abusing my son, then refusing to do anything about it, remaining employed with CPS, still working with children at this very moment, loading them on buses at CORE, while my son is sitting at home, being educated by parents who, I don't know about y'all, but I had a tutor in math, so I got nothing. That's dad's category. That's how we operate in the house. Like, we got to tag out because I can't do it all and neither can he. It's exhausting, if I might be very honest, to be a special needs parent. In the last year, I have completed and returned around 10, maybe 12 releases of information forms to CPS to be able to communicate with our son's doctors and therapy staff to make sure his needs are being met. We were constantly in disagreement in regards to the goals on his IEP, his individual education program, because they're refusing to do an individual program, and they are insisting on placing him at CORE, which is why we've been in such strong disagreement. When I did the investigation of his educational record with CPS, they had 1 release of information on file. 1. That's what the burden of proof not being on the school district will do. They don't keep track of anything because they don't care, because they don't have to prove anything. All they have to prove is that they did their job, even though there's cameras showing they didn't do their job. They didn't follow my son's IEP. His IEP clearly states when he is escalated to back away and give him space. They didn't do that. Instead, they pushed their bodies up against him and pushed him up against a wall and punched him and restrained him in illegal ways. On multiple occasions, this is not a one-time event. School districts must be held responsible for keeping track of our children's education. I think the size of this bag and that it's only 1 year of our son's education speaks for itself. As to the reason why parents should not be the ones that should be required to hold the burden of proof at a due process hearing. They have even gone out of their way to sway all supporting documentations in their favor. They have falsified every document that they can to make us look bad, all the way down to an OHI investigation. So while I continue to wait for our son's due process to be filed, and we continue to homeschool our son in the meantime because we have no choice, I am with you here today asking you to hear me as a parent to support the House Bill 2010. And I'll be back up here to talk about 2011.
I might have misunderstood you. When you said at CORE, is a IEP not required at CORE?
He has an individual education program and he has a behavior intervention program. They just don't follow it.
Okay, I think I
They make
just
him
misunderstood
earn
you.
sensory
Okay.
tools, which should never be the thing for a child on the autism spectrum.
I misunderstood.
Yeah, he's not being given access to his
All right.
FAPE.
Yeah, thanks. Any questions for this lady? Thanks again for your patience. Anyone else here in support of the bill?
Sorry, this is already hard to try to split when it kind of encompasses one thing. So I'll, if you're all right with this, I'll try to speak on 2010 and 2011 at one time. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so my name is Melissa Little. I'm a mother to 3 wonderful children. I'm here to speak to support both 2011 and 2010. We moved to Columbia, Missouri in January of 21. And when looking and relocating, my husband and I wanted a location that had autism services for our boys. Columbia happened to be at the top of our list due to cost of living, the medical providers, and then central location with our extended families. We've been thrilled to be here until we attempted to put our 12-year-old into Columbia Public Schools. In the state of Missouri, some of you may know that all IEPs are rejected and then a new one is created. So this is not a problem until the school refuses to provide proper supports needed for children to be successful. What we found in Columbia Public Schools, aside from being in Idaho and Illinois and dealing with different educational plans, that Columbia Public Schools attempts to place children with similar needs into the same classroom and build a system to fit each kid into that program. But let me remind you that IEP stands for Individual Education Plan. They refused to provide my son with a one-to-one support, and that not only placed my son at risk, but the entire student body. He was a victim of a hate crime in Idaho, and he needed that support due to trauma triggers and his disabilities, autism, PTSD, ADHD. I was told that he would not receive this as a comparable service, that he would get that classroom because CPS doesn't do one-to-one aids. They do classrooms. My son in Idaho, the entire IEP team determined that the paraprofessional was required to keep all student bodies safe. When he's in a general ed classroom setting, he's able to learn from his peers. When you place him into a building, into a specific classroom with like children, they don't have any positive role models. And so for me, when we speak on burden of proof and consent, I didn't have any say in how he was supported. And like I said, that left it left my child unsupported, and he began to get suspended left and right. I have multiple children with special needs, and I was being called to the school every day to pick them up. During this time, we couldn't finish any of the needed assessments or anything because he continued to be suspended. The simple solution would have been to give my kid a para. Sorry. But instead, I felt the need to remove him from the school to protect other children. And I couldn't carry that burden at home anymore, being the 24/7 caregiver. My son is now sitting in Black, Missouri, in a residential treatment facility, which is costing more money. I've had to give up my social work degree because I'm now on a registry for fighting to get my kids support. The simple solution was to create the individual education plan. I want to say one more thing. I apologize.
Take your time.
I want to note that Child Find is a component of individuals, the IDEA. Okay, and that requires state and local education agencies to identify, locate, and evaluate all children with disabilities residing in the state, regardless of the severity of their disabilities, and who are in need of special education and related services. It's great, right? We're going out, we're finding people, and we're helping them. Sadly, without the burden of proof being on the school, parents can't afford representation. They're left to remove their child. I was in a state of crisis 24/7. I couldn't even have the time to figure this out. I had to make sure that my son wasn't hurting anybody else. I didn't have the time or the emotion, so I had to just pull him. I didn't have $8,000. I couldn't find an attorney to help. I just had to pull him out, and I became the full caregiver, and I couldn't handle it anymore. And I was forced to place him in a broken system, give up my education, and put him in a system that I don't even know if it's going to help him. And all we could have done was get a one-to-one. Work on his education plan. We need to hold the districts accountable. We have plenty of amazing districts. I've dealt with special needs and IEPs in multiple states and multiple districts. And I have never seen a city that has such good medical representation, have such, I don't even know what to call it. I'm sorry. I've strayed from my notes. But Child Find, we can't praise Child Find and do this and then not follow through with giving a free and appropriate education. They move forward, they move our kids, they put them where they want to go, they leave them unsupported. It's terrible. I'm asking that you guys support House Bill 2010 and 2011. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Nirenberg.
Just a comment. You're so brave, and I thank you so much for sharing your story.
And I expressed this morning, but you all are I'm going to call you guys my long haulers here this afternoon, because that's what you all are. You continue to fight for not just your kids, but for so many kids who are in these situations. And like I said, I really feel like this has been a call to action, not just this bill, but other bills that we've heard. And you speak to, I think the gravity of this is when we don't get kids help early and the help they need and the help they deserve, then the problems only escalate. And one of the things I've been fighting through, not just this committee, but also through the budget process, I mean, there is no price. I mean, I as you shared the story about your kiddo now in a residential facility, no amount of fighting for your kid, you can't put a price to that, right? Like that, you are going to do whatever you need to get him help, but at the end of the day, you don't know if that's even the right thing. And so we make tough decisions all the time as legislators, and we cut a lot of things, but there's certain things that we can never cut, and that's that early intervention. That's the additional support for those social emotional needs that are so dire for so many students. Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'm actually addressing you. So please, if I know, take a break. But what I'm saying is, I had this last week in the budget committee, is that we see for pediatric inpatient, for example, in Missouri, we have zero capacity. They actually shared that we only have about 22 beds that could serve an inpatient psych for our kids, where we see a need that I've seen the range of, we are serving 1/100th of our need right now. So like I say, when we're not doing these things early on, when we're not doing it on the front lines in our, with pre-K, with, the Head Start type programs, First Steps, all of those things, you don't get the help there. It's going to carry over. A lot of things are going to naturally, just because of how mental health progresses, naturally kind of change, right? As kids mature, and that's just part of the biology, if you will, right? But this is the part that you all are just helping us so much, walk us through this, because it's so complex, and nobody wants to be an expert on this, but all of a sudden you're forced to be the expert because you have to fight for your kid. So please, I just want to, say for the record that I am certainly happy to do whatever I can to be an advocate for you and for others.
Thank you. I just want to speak to early intervention. It's definitely key, but I think we've left our focus there. Our adolescents, when I had to call the police officer to help me with my son, he let me know that there's 150 other students in Columbia, Missouri alone. Great, we have the early intervention now, and we can slowly make that better. But what are we doing for our adolescents that didn't have that early intervention? All of that money, I'm sorry, I'm just a mom here, so I'm going to say it looks like all of that money is going to early intervention. What are we doing to help our adolescents?
And that's, and as you shared, that's when it gets, unfortunately, right, just because of the development of kids, all of a sudden now you're dealing with kids that are adult size, right? Mm-hmm. With all those really big emotions that simply don't know how to go through these things. And then we have to make these tough choices, right? So now we're going the law enforcement route and supporting there instead of continuing to help them where they are truly. And I say that honestly, there's a lot that the state's doing, but I want to make sure that your voice and your stories aren't lost in those conversations. So I guess I could say it's unfortunate that we're in the situation now that there's so many really dire stories out there that now we're looking at, okay, well, I just want to, I appreciate what you say there, because yes, there has been a lot of emphasis on early education. I don't think we have to rob Peter to pay Paul. I don't think we have to.
I think we need to put more in that range.
I think we have to do both. And I say that throughout that, the whole spectrum of development, we have to make sure we're doing both, that we're not all of a sudden we get these kids through and then we abandon them somewhere in their teen years too. So,
and I'm seeing it. My son is he's been funneled into the judicial system. He's a kid with a disability. He's been abused. He's a victim of a hate crime. And we just funnel him into the system. And then and I know this a little off topic, but I think since we're here, I had to give up my son to a broken system because in the state of Missouri, there's no way to get your child residential treatment. I wanted to find a way to pay for it myself. And I was reaching out to all these residential agencies. You know what they told me? You got to put him in the state custody. Why? Why do I have to give you my kid to get him help? So I think all of this kind of connects because you have 150 approximately in Columbia alone. That's not even looking at St. Louis. That's not even looking at Kansas City. But these kids should be supported during the day because the law says that they deserve a free and appropriate education. So how do we collaboratively make it happen? When the burden is on us, like we're just pulling our kids out because we can't do it. And then you see what happens. And they're taking your dollars over here in social service. You know, I think it needs to be a collaborative approach. I think we definitely need to keep the money in early intervention. And I think we need to increase the training there. Because I don't know how many respite providers and autism support specialists we cycle. They don't get enough money for what they deal with. They don't. And then we have these adolescents, and I'll share real quick, and then I know we have time, but I had a family service treatment plan today with all of our people involved in my son's case. And I had to sit there and tell government agencies that the level of treatment that my son is receiving still is not meeting his need. Still. But why is it that we have a school district like Lesterville willing to work with me, but you have a city like Columbia that draws people in, and then we don't support them? We can't, like I said before, you can't use Child Find and pull all these kids in and then just drop them. It doesn't work like that. So we need some sort of accountability, and this will hold school districts accountable. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Reich.
Couple of things I just want to say. Number one, I want to apologize to the chairman and the folks that are here. As some of you know in this room, and I don't want to cry either, I just got off a conference call. And you all know I was on a conference call. I'm a sole caregiver of a disabled family member who will mentally always be an adolescent. They will never grow up. They're over 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. I'm raising a child forever. They will outlive me. But what you touched on just now also, I have another family in my district who's told me the same thing. They started as a foster care of a young baby, later adopted, and now they're special needs child. The state is telling them, give up custody. Turn your child back to the state. They're crying to me. This is my child. Maybe I didn't give birth to them. I fostered them. I adopted them. They are my child. Why do I give them back to the state? I get it. I've been on a call like this since 2 o'clock about my person that I give care to 7 days a week. I get it.
I had to prep my son. I had to tell him what to expect, what would happen to him, how he'd get in a car with a stranger. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life. Ever. And no families should have to do this. When it comes down to doing simple things in a classroom to support children, we should be doing this. And we appreciate the districts that already are. We just want to hold the districts accountable that aren't. And that's what these bills will do, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Anyone else here to testify in support of the bill?
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, Craig Stevenson with Kids Win Missouri. Just want to go on record in support. I don't have anything in particular to add, but just sympathy and hope we can get this fixed for these parents.
Thank you. Any questions for this gentleman? Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyone else here to testify on the bill for or against informational purposes? That'll conclude the Public hearing on House Bill 2010 will now go to House Bill 2011. Representative Smith.
Thank you, sir. This bill requires public schools and any political subdivision of the state that serves students with an individual education program, or IEP, to implement parental consent procedures. Written parental consent shall be obtained and maintained for the initial placement, annual placement, or revision to a student's IEP. Department of Elementary and Secondary Education shall adopt a parental consent form as described in the bill that each school district shall provide to parents. And districts may not proceed with implementation of a student's IEP without the parental consent form completed except as provided in the bill. And one of the things we've been hearing a lot about and hearing especially this session is parents being more involved with the child's education, and what they're asking for with this bill are parents being involved with the child's IEP. A lot of what we just heard, but this basically deals with the parental consent that you talked about, Representative Brown, too. And once again, a lot of people behind me have experience with this, and they can answer questions better than I can.
Thank you, Representative Smith. Any questions? Thank you for your patience and waiting today. And
thank you all for hearing the bill.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Is there anyone here in support of this bill that would like to testify? Come forward. And if we could...
I promise I will keep this short. I actually have a doctor's appointment at 4 o'clock I'll be taking in my car. I did not think I would still be here. Thought it was safe to schedule for. So. Again, my name is Brianna Conley. I am the Public Policy and Youth Services Manager at Paraquad, one of the oldest and largest centers for independent living. I'm going to provide a little background information, kind of from a professional perspective, and then I'm going to get out of the way because there's a lot of valuable lived experience in this room that I just do not have, and they can give you the intricacies of the real consequences better than I can. But as you are all very aware by now, that children with disabilities are guaranteed the right to a free and appropriate public education, and the individualized education program, IEP, is foundational to that right. Once a child is deemed eligible for special education services, an IEP team is required by law to meet within 30 calendar days to develop the IEP based on the student's unique needs. Members of this team include the child's parents, not less than one general education instructor, not less than one special education instructor, not less than one person who can explain the results of testing, a representative from the school, the child when appropriate, and anyone else who may have relevant knowledge of the student and is invited by either the parent or the district. That is a lot of experts in the room. Among other things, the IEP outlines annual goals for the child, when and how progress towards these goals will be measured, how the child will be included in general education, what accommodations and/or modifications are required for instruction and testing, and a transition and post-high school plan for children 16 and older. IEPs must be reviewed and revised by the team at least once annually, and per the Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, a parent or guardian signature is required to implement the initial IEP, but there's no such requirement for the mandated subsequent annual updates. The topics covered by the IEP are crucial to the long-term educational success of well-being of children with disabilities, and that's not just in school, that is beyond, especially with that transition piece there. As you can imagine, these meetings are very long, technical, emotionally charged, particularly for parents who want what's best for their child, but who are not usually experts in the education system and who are vastly outnumbered at the table by people who are. At the end of an IEP meeting, all parties are asked to sign, but what many parents don't realize is at the end of this long process, their consent to that IEP is little more than a nicety. Even if a parent disagrees with the plan laid forth and refuses to sign, the IEP will still go into effect in 10 days without a parent or guardian signature unless a due process complaint is filed. We've talked a lot about what that looks like. So such complaints are expensive, often involve lawyers, and take months to resolve. This is just not practical. The ability to unilaterally change and implement an IEP gives school districts a frightening amount of power over families and the long-term future of students with disabilities. Often IEPs are associated with provisions for extra test time or specialized therapy, but they cover a lot more than that. It is through the IEP process that children can be moved out of one classroom and into another, or even from one school to another. Now just imagine for a moment if you're a parent being told that regardless of what you know or feel is best for your child, they're to be pulled from their classroom and taken away from your neighborhood school where they may have a rapport with their teacher and a close friend or two, to be placed in an unfamiliar setting at the sole discretion and judgment of the district. That district, by the way, faces very little accountability or oversight for its decision to move your child due to the barriers to an effective due process complaint. At Paraquad, we've worked with many families facing this exact situation, and in fact, one of our participants has just been moved to her third school in 4 years over her parents' objections and firm belief that she needs a consistent learning environment. 3 schools in 4 years would be hard for any child, and a district that puts a child in that situation owes it to that child and his or her parents to prove that that decision to do so really is in their best educational interests and not simply a matter of convenience or cost.
Okay,
The
could
IEP
you kind of
process-
summarize it up, please?
It's supposed to be
appreciate
collaborative. In most cases, it is. But when it's not, schools are given way too much of the power. And research has consistently shown that children with and without disabilities do better in school and beyond when parents and schools work together as a team. And this bill supports that partnership. It strengthens it, and it makes the school and district allies, or the parents and district allies.
Okay, thank you so much. Any questions? Okay, thank you again. Next witness, is there anybody here opposing this bill? Anyone for informational purposes? Next witness in support.
Hello, Michelle Robato. I submitted written when I did my testimony stuff, so I'll let you guys read that, but I just wanted to point out a couple things. One is what Brianna said, initial does require the parent to sign. After that, no more. So think about that child, like my son, who was got his first IEP when he was in kindergarten. It didn't matter what I said after that, because, and one thing that Brianna said, which I love, that frighteningly unilateral choices that are made can be rough. And so if all these parents that were here, that were all these stories, parental consent would have stopped those. Parental consent would have required getting around that table, working it out, getting those, so the lawyers would not have gotten $30,000. Instead, they would have worked right at that table and worked it out. So it's really detrimental to not let parents have that consent and signature part. I'll just flip through here. Like they said, it goes into effect in 10 days. Doesn't matter what I do or say. I'm sure some people are thinking, like, well, what if you have someone who's just a sticking point? The rest of the IEP can go into effect, and that one sticking point will stay with the previous IEP. So then you can just work that out. And our DESE has facilitated IEPs, mediation. There's other things that don't have to go to due process and attorneys. Is that short enough?
Thank you so much.
I was trying
any questions for the lady? Appreciate it. Next witness in support of the bill.
Pass out papers.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Dr. Laura Wakefield. I'm from Columbia, Boone County, and Robin Shelp is passing out a visual to you so that what I'm describing will make more sense to you. And I think Representative Brown, this was related to the question that you were having earlier about the check boxes and things, so you can see what I'm talking about. So as I mentioned before, I'm a private practice advocate for children with disabilities. Been in over 3,000 IEP meetings. I have a national consulting business. The concentration of my clients are in Missouri. In 2009, I started out with 12 clients, and now in 2022, I have over 800 clients in the state. And about 50% of those clients come to me related to that very first page of the handout, something called placement issues. And this is usually when a school district is proposing to the parent that the child will go into a more restrictive placement or a segregated placement, and the parent disagrees with that. So the clients contact me. So just to give you an idea, about approximately 50% of my referrals are related to that concern. I'm in support of House Bill 2011, which will provide more robust parent consent procedures for parents of students with disabilities related to the IEPs. Specifically, this bill allows parents to consent annually to any placement changes or revisions to their child's IEPs. The placement issue is one of the main reasons why we end up with due process in our state. So if we could work towards getting the parental consent stronger, and parents can have the option to disagree with that placement and continue to work it out with the team, you're going to prevent a lot of the due process issues. Right now, as was mentioned before, the only time they can give consent is in the initial IEP, and then after that, an LEA can basically bully a parent and say, well, that's great that you don't agree with us, but we have the final say. So if you turn to that second page, you will see the highlighted box. Those are all the things that a school district can do that does not require parental consent. So they can change a child's placement, they can remove goals, they can remove services. And the only thing a parent can do, if you turn to the very back, there's a box and it says, when they sign at the bottom, they think they're signing like, I disagree or whatever, but that's not what that is. It just says, sign here if you waive your 10 days and we'll go ahead and immediately implement what we said, okay? And if you don't sign within 10 calendar days, what we said is going to happen. So that's the current process we have, and that's the form. That is a DESE model form, so every school district has that type of form. So just to kind of let you guys see the paperwork process and the procedure that's in place. So everything in that yellow box a school district can do, parent has no way to fight that or disagree with it unless they follow a due process, in which you just heard how impossible that is. Thank you very much.
Dr. Wakefield, are there other states that have similar legislation in place already?
Yes, there are approximately 8 or 9 where you have what we call parental consent states, and I talk to advocates all over the nation in a weekly call. And as these states are moving towards the parental consent, you begin to see less and less due processes happening there in their data. And you also start to see less and less abuse, less segregated settings. You see the school districts having to work it out with the parents. Now, the meetings might be longer. They might have to have facilitators from their Department of Elementary and Secondary Education come in. But you do see that they're working out the situations better and getting a better setup for the kids.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Representative Pollack? Go ahead, sir.
Afternoon. A number of years ago, there was a lawsuit that school districts weren't required to maximize a student's education. Has that changed, or how does that fit into your questions on placements and stuff?
Okay, so you're talking about the Supreme Court decision?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So prior to that decision, it's called the Andrew decision in 2017. And prior to that, we had the Raleigh decision. And the Raleigh decision allowed in due process hearings that school districts only had to show above de minimis, meaning if a child made a 1% progress on their IEP goal, then it was considered fine. 1% progress in an entire year, that was considered fine under the Raleigh decision from 1987 until 2017. And in 2017, the Andrew decision came about, and it changed to say that children must basically meet all their goals in light of their in light of their disability. So that was a big shift.
So that's
yes.
that's a change in the last 5 years then?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next witness in support.
Hello, y'all. Crystal, again, mom from CPS School District. One small correction. There is actually 10 states for consent. I was one of them. Michelle told me correct her. Sorry. I was like, there's actually 10. So anyway, you all have been apprised of my son today. So anyway, when he started the 5th grade here in Missouri at Alpha Hart Elementary, His special education teacher was actually wonderful. I have nothing bad to say about Miss Luna. She was a godsend. We spoke every day regarding how things were progressing, and she agreed to follow the modified version of his Iowa IEP because, as you heard before, Missouri just throws them out. They don't do anything with them. So even though we had an immaculate IEP in Iowa, they discarded it, trashed it, literally, started from scratch. Okay, so when CPS got a plan in place, we were going to have an IEP. Until then, we struggled. We struggled with elopement issues. We struggled with staff not meeting his needs. We struggled with them putting him in general education classrooms with no para support. My son, while verbal and 11 years of age in 5th grade, probably has the mental capacity of a 3rd grader, okay? When we were in Iowa, he was told to line up. This is your place in line. Every kid had a number. So when he came to Columbia and they said, you need to go here in line, every day he tried to get in that spot in line. And every day he got bullied by kids for budging in line. But no one ever told him. No one ever told him that wasn't his spot every day. That's how it was in Iowa with COVID because the kids couldn't be next to each other. So you stood in your place in line. This is how lacking and how easy it is to set off a kid on the spectrum. I just want you to have a very clear understanding that that can cause a full-on meltdown. Okay, so we later discovered that no one outside of the principal or the special education staff knew about his IEP or his behavior intervention plan. I like improvement plan better. Somebody said that. We were only notified when they started having compliance issues in general education setting, and he would elope out of the classroom and hide from the staff, and they lost him for an hour. Didn't even put it on paper that they lost him. Just called me and then kicked him out. So the special education director, Elise Monsees, predetermined our son to go to Rosetta. We were not given any general education alternatives, not one. Not one recommendation of a school that could handle our son running out of a classroom. Seems kind of ridiculous, but that's just my opinion. She told us that Rosetta is part of the Quest program, which is a program for children with more behaviorally focused needs. It is, in fact, not a program. It is a seclusive school with a power-down seclusion room, with locks on the doors leading to every outdoor exit, with no access to general education or general education peers at all. To date, Ms. Monsees has insisted that he can not attend a general education school, period. Period. And she has also refused to allow us to have a say in where he receives his education at all. We have proposed all of the general education options, even those with the secluded SKIP programs where they can shape him into a Lego to fit into that program over there at SKIP. They even tried to do that, but that didn't work. He can't go there either. Well, why can't he go there? Because he elopes. Yeah. He runs away from staff when he's terrified of you. Yes, he has a fight or flight response. Most children on the spectrum do. In Iowa, our son regularly had a graduated introductory schedule to every year. They have refused to implement that here. We never attended anything outside of general education. We had no idea what to expect. So when she told me Rosetta is this wonderful program, and I met with the teacher, I couldn't wait to get him in there because I was just like, oh, okay, this sounds awesome. There's cameras everywhere. I'm going to see all the things. Yeah, until I saw her provoke my son after they abused him and point to something in the ceiling, which 2 seconds later he jumped and tried to grab, and she grabbed him by his arm and threw him right into the corner of the room on video surveillance. But guess what? OHI says unsubstantiated abuse. My 11-year-old, 100-pound child was a threat to the 3 adults in that room as big as a closet because he pulled on a piece of fabric that was hanging down from the ceiling and was provoked by staff to do so. Very interesting. So again, I thank you for all of your time. I thank you for all of the energy that you're putting into this very long day and hearing all of these emotional stories. And I just, again, ask for you to see us as the parents that we are. We can't carry the burden of proof anymore. Our backs are broken and we're tired.
Well, we thank you for
And
your
we
patience.
Appreciate your
long
11
day.
support as well.
Yep. Any questions? Thank you, ma'am, so much. Anyone else here in support of the bill?
Hello again, Erin Keith. I'm a parent of 3 in Columbia, Missouri. I just wanted to go on record really quick saying I support parental consent. I think it's important to remember that families are a large part of the IEP team who needs to work together for the child. When schools have the final say on things, it really takes away the weight of the family's say as well. I know you guys heard my story recently when I was up here, and in that meeting in June, they were not I just wanted to talk it out right there in the IEP team meeting, and they shut me down. They said, yes, he's making progress, but it's not enough. They could not tell me when I asked them, okay, well, how much would have been enough? He'd only had a month since our last IEP meeting. How much was he supposed to progress in that month for him to get to stay? They couldn't answer that. We asked for them to review the evaluation, and they refused that as well. They just said none of it would matter, none of it would change their decision. And so I was left with no choice but to file. I mean, if I'd had to sign parental consent for them to do that, they would have had to sit and we could have talked it out. I want nothing more than to be able to collaborate. I think that's really what is best for the student, is if families and schools can work together. And that's the goal of the parental consent bill. So I urge you to support that as well.
Okay, thank you, ma'am, very much. Any questions for this lady? Appreciate it. Is there anyone else here in support? We need to move along. We got one more bill.
Robin Shelp, Missouri Disability Empowerment. We support this, and I want you to know, I know you've heard a lot of stories from Columbia. We get emails from all over the state. This is not just a Columbia thing. It is happening everywhere. I had a Southern Missouri legislator call me this fall saying, hey, my district's trying to move a kid to a private school. They can't just do that, can they? And I said, yeah, they can. They can do that. It is happening. It's happening everywhere. But I will also say there's a lot of good happening everywhere. My son's IEP teams, they're great. I talked with the Blue Springs special ed teacher. She said, I wouldn't dream of leaving an IEP meeting without a parent's signature. If you're doing it right, you're going to get the signature. Thanks.
Okay.
Luke Barber from Des Peres, 63131. Often what is discussed during an IEP meeting or 504 plan is not what is actually written down in the document at the end of the day. As a student with a disability, autism spectrum diagnosis, I led my own IEPs, something that many students with disabilities don't get to do. During my IEP, I knew what services, supports, and accommodations I needed. However, when my transitional IEP was done, it had several of the misguided stereotypes in it. It said I wouldn't work, wouldn't go to college, and wouldn't do many things that simply aren't true. I have a job, and I am currently working on my bachelor's degree. However, because I did not see my final IEP and had to sign off on it, only my parents had to. And they signed it because they said, oh, you're just going to graduate anyway in a few months. However, given this idea that it should be either the parents or the student, if the student is capable of understanding their own IEP goals, expectations, accommodations, and needs. If a student with a disability can understand their own learning opportunity, their own learning objectives, then they should be the ones signing their name on the dotted line. Because at the end of the day, it is the student that matters. We are students first, and that is how accommodations and things should be worded around us. Several of my accommodations that I received were in K through 5 education, such as speech therapy, occupational therapy, which helped with fine and gross motor skills as well as language skills. These were done in what is called the resource level. However, during my middle and high school years, I was mainstreamed in the general education classroom with non-disabled peers in the least restricting setting. This is how IEPs are supposed to be. However, Since the IEPs that I used in my transitional plan are used for college, work, and everywhere else, that document was a legally binding document. So now when I ask for accommodations at colleges and universities and other places, they're like, why are you here? Your IEP said that, oh, you weren't cut out for this. These misguided stereotypes and stuff happen all the time. And I graduated from Kirkwood High in 2014. Kirkwood High is one of the better school districts in the state of Missouri for IEP compliance.
Mr. Barber, could you wrap it up, please?
And therefore, students with a disability should be the ones at the decision table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the gentleman? Thanks.
Chair, members of the committee, Craig Stevenson again with Kids Win Missouri. Just wanted to go on record in support. The one thing that hasn't been said that I want to highlight that by not requiring consent, there is a power dynamic that is on the school district's side that by opening and requiring consent, it levels that playing field, and that's a big deal for parents. So thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Brown.
Question for the bill sponsor.
Question for the bill sponsor, Representative Smith.
I apologize for bringing you back up here really quick.
Yes, ma'am. No.
The young man's testimony, I can absolutely concur with that. My son had both my sons had transitional IEPs. They used them in college. The problem is there's this gap on this IEP. So we write a transitional IEP, and 4 months later, while it works, I can no longer have any say. As soon as they turn 18, I don't get any say. Would you accept an amendment to include the transitional IEP to have the student signature?
We'll certainly look at that too.
Thank you.
Because that is one frustrating thing as a parent. All my kids went to MU, and when it came time for the bills, they always called and said, we need your money. But when it came time to look at grades or whatever, no, you can't see that because he's an adult. And I'm like, well, have them pay.
Right. Send the bill there. So I'm with you, but let's talk about that if you would.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else here to testify on the bill? All right, that'll conclude the public hearing on House Bill 2011. And if we could possibly get to the last bill, and if we have to carry it over, we will.
All right, Representative Basie, for presentation on House Bill 2359, proceed when ready. Could I just get a show of hands of who plans on testifying in support? Against the bill? Informational purposes. Representative Basie, continue.
Okay, thank you. This is House Bill 2359. Pardon me. This is, in my opinion, a very simple bill. This just includes the public school employees in the state of Missouri into the Missouri Accountability Portal to make their salary, compensation, and benefits available to the public. And a lot of people think that that is already in existence. And there's a situation, again, I hate to keep banging on the same district, but in Columbia Public Schools, there are some employees that are employees in the district, and their salary information is hidden. I sent a sunshine request. They required me to pay for it. I refused to do that. I went to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and asked for that information. Even the department could not get that information from the school district, and I find that reprehensible. So that is the purpose of the bill, and there may be other districts in the state that are doing the same thing. So I think, our salary information is available to the public, and I think public school people are receiving taxpayer benefits, or they're being paid by taxpayers. Their information should be transparent and open to the public, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Gentlemen, so you're just providing transparency, and as we see time and time again with existing statute. So Representative Sharp.
And if we have to carry this over, we can, but we need to be out here by 4. So I don't want to. If you have a question, I'd be glad to take it.
Just a quick question. So you were trying to, what information were you trying to get from the Columbia Public School District?
There's a couple of employees that are very instrumental in some problems with parents, And we do not know what they're compensated, but they have a lot of authority and a lot of power in that district.
Gotcha.
And I don't know what they, how much they're paid.
So normally you can find for a school district, you can just find their pay schedule online somewhere, and that isn't the
The
case.
only site I've seen is through the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, the most up-to-date information.
Okay.
So other than that, it's not available in a lot of areas that I've been able to find. And, again, I asked the department to find it, and they were not given the information either.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Brown, we got about 1 minute.
I got one question. Okay. So, you know that I come from a school district where everything's out there on the portal. So, is this an individual that falls within negotiated contracts people? Or is this like an assistant superintendent? Can you be more specific?
It is the several people. The board secretary is one, and the director of communications. She might very well be on a contract negotiating team with the exclusive representative. I don't know.
No. Okay, so neither one of them would be, because one's classified, one is at will, so they wouldn't be. But those public contracts are supposed to be public because they're settled in board.
That's my understanding, but they will not release that information. And I'll share the emails with the committee that I got from Desi if you'd like.
No, it's all right. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Any additional questions? And then one more time, is there anybody testify in support? Against? Informational purposes? This concludes the hearing on House Bill 2359. We are adjourned.